Sophy and Wilf, good morning from me as well. Let's get to it.
Police launched an investigation after a suspected anti-Semitic arson attack on Jewish volunteer ambulances in North London.
The Prime Minister gets ready to chair an emergency COBRA meeting on the effect the Iran war is having on UK households after another phone call with Donald Trump last night.
Big falls in the Asian markets this morning as they react to Donald Trump's Iran ultimatum. He says, open the Strait of Hormuz or we destroy your power plants.
Jackie is going to be here with the sport, including Man City's triumph in the Carabao Cup final, beating Arsenal 2-0.
And we bring you the moment that Sky News tracks down and confronts the fraudster who conned an old lady out of her life savings before fleeing prison in Tenerife.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us today. We start with some breaking news overnight. A suspected anti-Semitic arson attack on a Jewish volunteer ambulance service in North London. 4 ambulances outside a synagogue in Golders Green were set on fire last night. The London Fire Brigade say the vehicles were destroyed after cylinders inside the ambulances exploded. It also caused windows to break in an adjacent block of flats. So the good news is that no injuries have been reported, but still, of course, you can see on your screens there the extent of the blaze that happened. Oliver is there for us at the scene. Oliver, what more do we know about what's happened?
Good morning, Sophy and Wilfred. We know at about 1:40 in the morning, that's when the first of about 56 phone calls went into the control room at London Fire Brigade with concerned residents saying that they could see vehicles alight and that they could also hear explosions. Now, according to the authorities, the cause of those explosions was canisters inside the ambulances. Once those vehicles had been set on fire and they reached that critical temperature, that's when they exploded. And you can see, probably just behind me, 2 of those ambulances that have been damaged in this attack, which has been labelled an anti-Semitic hate crime by the Metropolitan Police. There's a large Jewish community in Golders Green in North London, and Hatzola Ambulance Service provides a privately run, volunteer-led ambulance service for this local community. It's sensitive to the cultural traditions of this religion. It is thought of really highly in this local area, and so four of these ambulances out of what we believe to be 6 to be attacked has really upset people in this local area. Of course, an area has been on high alert for anti-Semitism in the wake of what we saw on the October the 7th attacks that happened in Israel a few years ago. There's also been the attack that happened up in Manchester in Heaton Park at the synagogue there. So clearly this is now a community that is incredibly concerned. They're hoping that the police investigation, as it's now kicking off, will be able to find the perpetrators as quickly as possible. Earlier on, I was speaking to 2 local residents who actually saw and heard those explosions as they were happening.
When I got there, then there was already a large fire engine support team and the police. They'd already blocked off some of the road, but we could still see it from a distance. 2 ambulances were already on fire, and I could see from the distance there was a 3rd that hadn't caught fire yet. But when I was there, that one blew up. These ambulances are actually parked in a synagogue's car park. And just to see that clip that is now doing its rounds on social media of a few hooded individuals lighting life-saving ambulances is something that just is shaking us all to the core.
So we were obviously sleeping at that time, and we just heard explosions, and our windows kind of moved and we heard the burst. So we looked out the window and we saw the ambulances on fire.
Now, a lot of the people that we've been speaking to say they aren't surprised that this has happened. They had been anticipating that something like this would happen. They say that is the reality of being a Jewish person in the United Kingdom at the moment, that you're incredibly aware of your security situation, you're incredibly aware that something could happen. They say, though, thankfully, nobody has been injured in this blast, but clearly going forward they'll be looking for some sort of reassurance, they say, from the local authorities and from their community security service, who we've also been hearing from.
Oliver, thank you very much indeed, Oliver. Whitfield Marchich reporting for us there.
Right, let's bring you the latest now on the Iran war, because there's been some key developments both over the weekend and overnight. The Prime Minister will hold a COBRA meeting today looking at how the war is impacting the British economy. That's after having spoken to President Trump again on the phone last night.
And it comes after Donald Trump laid down a bit of an ultimatum for Iran. Open the Strait of Hormuz this evening, or the US will obliterate Iran's power plants. We can speak now to Sally Lockwood, who's in Dubai with the latest for us. Sally, what do you make about this latest ultimatum from Donald Trump?
It's something people here are watching very closely, Sophie. Well, certainly, you know, it's been all the talk since Donald Trump made that ultimatum, giving Iran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or expect attacks on their oil infrastructure, on their energy plants, starting with the biggest, as he warned on his Truth Social. And that is not being taken lightly here. It's something that people are very concerned about. I was speaking with residents last night who are now discussing potential evacuation plans if indeed things do escalate. But something that may complicate that, Sophie and Wilf, is that there's quite a heavy rainstorm here today. Oman has already reported deaths due to flash flooding, and that rain and bad weather is due to last much of the week. And people are concerned that if indeed we do see flash flooding here in the UAE, whether that could complicate evacuation plans if people need to use a land border. We are also seeing daily interceptions of missiles and drones. We had another shelter-in-place order here just before 7 o'clock this morning in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and reports that an Indian resident has been injured by falling shrapnel in Abu Dhabi after an intercepted missile that was intercepted over an industrial area close to the US military base Al Dhafra in Abu Dhabi. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Bahrain have also reported interceptions overnight. But of course, it is this ultimatum, this deadline, which would be in the early hours of tomorrow morning, that we would reach that deadline of Donald Trump's 48 hours for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And we have seen just what a headache this Strait of Hormuz effective closure is for Donald Trump. He's come up with various ideas of how to reopen it, whether it's, you know, international partners bringing in warships to help police the Strait of Hormuz. None of his ideas have come to fruition so far. And he's now resorting to very, very escalatory threats. And it's not clear whether he will follow those through, but certainly Iran has retaliated. Every time America and Israel have escalated this war, Iran has retaliated. And they've also said that if America does follow through with this threat, then they will retaliate and target American and Israeli critical infrastructure in this region. And we don't know to what extent those targets would be, but certainly it's something we're watching very closely here, with that deadline looming in the early hours of tomorrow morning local time here.
Sally, thanks so much. Sally Lockwood there for us in Dubai. Well, as we mentioned, Donald Trump and Keir Starmer spoke for about 20 minutes on the phone once again last night. The Strait of Hormuz was, of course, one of the main topics of conversation. And then later this afternoon, the Prime Minister is going to be chairing that Cobra meeting where they're going to be talking about how the war is impacting the economy. We can bring in Alex Rogers with us for more. On the Cobra meeting, quite interesting to see the guest list, the Bank of England governor on there as well.
I think that's a sign of how much the economy is going to dominate this conversation. I mean, there's concerns that inflation could reach 5%, really hitting households. So I think that's going to be the government's focus. There's also Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, is going to be there, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and Ed Miliband as well, the Energy Secretary.
And can you talk a bit more about the phone conversation as well between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer? Because it was 20 minutes. Do we know much about it?
The Strait of Hormuz was the key topic line. There wasn't much else in there apart from they discussed the situation in the Middle East, which is the line that I've seen often coming out of these readouts. But obviously it's the Strait of Hormuz and the effect that that's having on oil prices, and obviously Donald Trump's ultimatum there. So obviously escalating beyond what ministers want. They've been saying over the weekend, we want this war to end now. We don't want this to escalate. But it does look like it's out of our hands at the moment.
Alex, great stuff. Thanks so much. And of course, that phone call was Sunday night, not Saturday night live, which we'll come back to perhaps a little bit later. We're going to continue the discussion, particularly on the costs of the war in a moment, and on borrowing costs in particular. But we just have to hit pause for some breaking news to bring you first of all. There has been a plane crash at New York's LaGuardia airport. This is being reported by our colleagues at NBC News. As you can see, flights have been grounded after an Air Canada flight and a Port Authority vehicle, so sort of airport vehicle, collided on the runway.
Reuters are now reporting that the two people who died were the pilot and the co-pilot of that flight. That just coming in now from Reuters. Also, NBC, also I can just see just popping in now. That is also being reported by NBC. The pilot and the co-pilot of that plane have been killed. It
were 72 passengers and 4 crew on board. We understand, as current reporting from NBC, the 2 casualties, though, were the pilot and co-pilot. This was at 11:40 p.m. last night. It was a Jazz aviation flight operating on behalf of Air Canada, runway 4 at LaGuardia. And LaGuardia, of course, is one of the 3 main airports that serves New York, JFK, Newark and LaGuardia, the 3 biggest airports in the surrounding region. LaGuardia typically for smaller domestic flights rather than international. But as you can see there, live picture, if everything's grounded, it's a huge knock-on effect. Right, we'll have more on that when we have it, but let's pivot back to the story we were just discussing and the impact on the economy from the Iran war. Let's start, as we always do for the last few weeks, with a picture of oil prices. Oil prices actually relatively calm this morning. They're not really moving, but they moved once again significantly last week and at the end of last week. 112 the price for Brent crude this morning, as you can see, surging significantly since the start of the war. One of the things we've been saying is the way in which this hasn't really infected, say, all financial markets, like equities, like stocks and shares. But last week, very, very clearly, it infected UK borrowing costs. It affected the UK bond market. Here is the 10-year government bond yield. This is seen as the sort of best indicator for our long-term borrowing costs. You can see how sharp the increase has been, in particular last week, by the way. Late last week, after the Bank of England meeting, we surged again. And this, if we zoom out again a little bit, you see we basically hit 5% on Friday. This isn't open yet this morning. It opens next hour. This is what we're going to be watching unbelievably closely this morning, the UK bond market. 5% isn't just a high that we haven't seen for a year. It's a high that we haven't seen since the start of the financial crisis for 18 years, since 2008. And seeing it touch 5% is really quite striking. I just want to show you another snapshot of this. That's the 10-year borrowing costs. This is our 1-year borrowing cost. Again, you see an unbelievably sharp surge in the last couple of weeks. And just for some context here, the Bank of England base rate is 3.75%. Before this started, we were down at 3.5%. So people expected a rate cut. We surged to 4.5% last week. The Bank of England base rate is 3.75%. Previously expecting a small cut, now in 1 year's time, the market is suggesting our interest rate will be up to about 4.5%. An unbelievably pronounced short-term surge. Very, very hard for the government to plan going forward if borrowing costs are increasing by this magnitude. And the reason I just wanted to end on this particular chart, Sophie, is if we showed this for the US as an example, it'd be similar starting point, 3.4% rather than 3.5%. But the start of the war, and it surged only to about 3.7. So the increase you're seeing in UK borrowing costs is really pronounced, much, much more than the US, much more really than anywhere. And it just highlights that this is not a shock that was caused by the UK, but it is a particularly damaging problem for the UK because we, of course, are a net energy importer, unlike the US, and because we still spend far more than we generate each year. So when suddenly costs go up, it's sort of self-fulfilling going forward. And interesting that Andrew Bailey will be in the COBRA meeting today. Yeah, Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor there. Well, we'll see, look, what if support, if any, the government announces to help households later. But some people are already changing their behaviour, as Tom Parmenter reports.
Prices are only going one way, and some drivers are changing their daily routines because of it.
I'm cycling now. Yeah, and I'm getting in like with other people. But yeah, cycling now.
Others are just resigned to it and paying up.
I don't actually feel like it makes that much difference. You know, you have to fill your car up.
I live in a rural environment, so I'm stuck with it.
There is no shortage of fuel here. Supply and stocks are healthy. But what we've just seen while we were filming is the price of diesel go up yet again. And that's something that's happened 4 times here in the last week.
Every time he's had to do it, Goran, who runs this family-owned garage, knows the impact it has in his part of Essex.
It's an awful feeling. No one's benefiting from this. The only people earning money on this are commodity traders on the prices and the Treasury. The general public is losing out on this. It's too expensive. We're down 30% on fuel sales, and you can just notice it on the roads now. People are choosing not to drive as much as they were.
The Prime Minister is due to chair a Cobra meeting on Monday, examining how the UK is being affected by disrupted fuel supplies in the Middle East. Their current advice is this.
People should go around and buy their fuel just like they always would. If the situation were to change, then the government would look at what was required in that circumstance.
For the hundreds of thousands of homes that have heating oil, mainly in rural areas, there's a dilemma too. Rather than pay a small fortune to fill up their tank in East Yorkshire, Jane and Mark are improvising.
Now we're going to try and eke it out, try and keep everything switched off and see if we can't wait until the prices
or I mean, we could go down the local gym and use the showers down there. Yeah, we're not rich enough to be able to say, yeah, we'll just go and splash out 850 to fill it up. And we're obviously not poor enough for anyone to give us any help.
While people will make their own decisions, energy experts suggest contingency measures like reducing speed limits or encouraging working from home are still some way off.
Right now, it is unlikely, I'd say, at least for a couple of months. Again, it depends upon the length of the war. Government will need to put plans in place. Given the prices are going up, you should also think about what you can do to drive more efficiently. So this means driving more slowly, being more, slowing down without the use of the brake and just letting yourself coast to a halt. So good driving practices more generally, but particularly important for saving fuel right now.
In the context of a war, it is a small price to pay. But this garage is expecting to have to push their numbers even higher this week. And nobody can say when normal service will resume. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Essex.
And Sky's Yala Hakim will have a special programme on the Iran war live from Beirut at 4 o'clock this afternoon. At the beginning of the year, it felt like the government had a good story to tell on the economy. You know, inflation coming down, some of those cost of living pressures easing. That has all changed because of the war in Iran. We've got this Cobra meeting today, the Emergency Committee, and it is very telling indeed, I would say, that the Governor of the Bank of England is going to be there as well. That suggests, A, the government is worried, and B, they can't bank on it being over quickly. They've got to prepare for some kind of ongoing economic shock. So there is an awful lot to discuss with our next guest, who is the Minister for Housing and Planning. Matthew Pennycook joins us now. Good to have you with us. And before we get into all that, I just wondered if we could start on the breaking news that's happened overnight. So this is the attack on 4 Jewish ambulances in North London. Can you tell us any more about what happened?
I don't have the details, any more details than are public at the moment. This is a deeply shocking incident, as you know, on volunteer Hatzola ambulances that serve the Jewish community. I think our thoughts in the first instance, obviously, are with the volunteers who man that service, with the wider community who will be feeling understandably concerned. The Met are investigating the incident as an anti-Jewish hate crime. If that is confirmed, I just want to be really clear, that would be an affront to the Jewish community in this country, but not only an affront to the Jewish community, an attack on us all, because there can be absolutely no place for anti-Semitism, for anti-Jewish hatred in this country. And sadly, I think it reinforces the need, as our department is doing, to invest in things like the Community Security Trust, which provides security to Jewish schools, synagogues and others. But it's deeply concerning.
Is London a safe place to be Jewish?
Well, I think the Jewish community in London and beyond will be waking up this morning feeling understandably concerned that we are seeing this rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred. That's why we're investing,
Is London a safe place to be Jewish? Because obviously everyone will be...
I think it is. And again, I don't want to speculate on what's a live investigation. The Met are treating this as an anti-Semitic crime, but that's not been confirmed. It looks, to all intents and purposes, that it is.
Because I guess...
London is a safe place, but it's an indictment that we need to invest in things like the CST, but we are, as well as education to stamp out in the long run anti-Semitism.
I guess what some Jewish people would say is that, you know, there has to have security outside Jewish schools.
Have had for a long time.
And have had for a long time. Jewish ambulances are being attacked. Many people, I think, would not feel safe.
Yep, and I can understand that. I think London still is safe. We've got to let the Met get on and investigate this particular incident, but it's shocking. Our thoughts are with those affected, and we will do, as a government, everything that we possibly can to, both stamp out anti-Semitism, to educate people about this vile, unique evil, prejudice that it is, but also to protect the Jewish community with investment in things like CST.
Can we talk about this COBRA meeting later today? The Governor of the Bank of England's also attending. Is this a sign of how worried the government is about the impact of on the cost of living of the war?
I think things are too uncertain to know now in terms of the long-term impact. It depends on how acute and how prolonged the crisis is, but we don't underestimate that it's extremely serious. The Chancellor's already been clear that it could well put upward pressure on inflation. It's absolutely right that the Governor of the Bank of England attends the COBRA meeting this afternoon.
Because of worry about mortgage rates as well, I guess.
Because we're worried about the wider impact on the cost of living generally, and it's our primary focus throughout the crisis to do everything we possibly can to fight people's corner and to ensure they have the support they need. And whether it comes to energy bills, where we've already taken action, and action taken in the budget will actually see people's bills come down on the 1st of April. But of course we're monitoring the situation.
You're talking there about the Chancellor, and I mean this with the kind of greatest respect possible. Don't we need to hear a bit more from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor? Like we haven't had them on one of these morning rounds. People are really, really worried. Where are they?
Well, we have heard from the Chancellor. I saw the Chancellor speaking to broadcasters just the other day. I'm sure off the back of the COBRA meeting there will be further statements. As a government, we're working as a team to monitor the situation and to do what is necessary to support the British people.
Donald Trump has given the Iranians a deadline of just before midnight tonight to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, he says the US will obliterate Iran's energy system. What's the government's view on whether that would be a good idea?
Well, you obviously know that the position we've taken throughout the crisis, we didn't participate in the initial strikes. Our focus throughout has been on protecting our people, our allies, our interests in the region.
Would it be a good idea for the US to obliterate Iran's energy system?
We have been very clear that we're doing everything we possibly can, including playing a full and active diplomatic
completely...
role.
The question is...
I want to answer it very directly.
OK, go on then.
We're calling for de-escalation of the conflict and to bring it to an end. That's our primary focus. That's what's in our national interest. So we don't want to see the conflict escalate.
So would it be a good idea for the US to obliterate Iran's energy system?
Well, I'm not going to... I understand why you're doing it. You're tempting me to comment on US strategy. That's for the US government. We have been very clear, alongside our allies, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, that we need to urgently see an end to this conflict. We need to de-escalate matters. That's in our national interest. That's in the interest of the global economy, given the impact that's feeding through.
I can understand, I get it, the nervousness to comment on Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump himself reposted a sketch from the new Saturday Night Live TV show this weekend, which depicted Keir Starmer as indecisive, almost kind of scared to speak of Donald Trump. And he posted this just before the phone call. I mean, is this kind of usual diplomatic sort of niceties?
I think nothing's usual with this particular president, and he posts all manner of things. But I think the Prime Minister would say this is a comedy sketch. He would take it in the spirit in which it's intended. It's a piece of fun. If he had time to watch it, that is. He's pretty busy, not least preparing for the COBRA meeting this afternoon, I'm sure.
I wondered if you might be able to give me a bit more detail of this call with Trump. It was 20 minutes long. We only got a 64-word briefing, and some of those words were like, the President has spoken to the Prime Minister. So what happened in the phone call? What did they talk about?
I wasn't on the phone call. I don't have all the details of what was discussed. Obviously, the conflict will be in the central issue, topic of conversation. I know a primary focus was how to reopen the Straits of Hormuz.
Do you genuinely not know any more than this, or is that?
No, I haven't had details of what exactly was said between the Prime Minister.
Don't you think the Prime Minister needs to be a bit more open, I guess, in what he's talking about for 20 minutes with Donald Trump at this time?
We have been open with the British people. We've been open in terms of how we're approaching the conflict. What is our primary focus in that? As I've said, to de-escalate, to protect our people, our allies, our interests in the region, acting in collective self-defence.
OK, all right.
But I think, the Prime Minister will say what he needs to say about these conversations with the American president in a way that's conducive to the national interest.
OK, and just final on Iran, because I know we're going to talk about your housing...
You asked me about new towns, yeah.
We are going to talk about your housing announcement as well, but actually I think you can appreciate this. It's a very worrying time. Israel has claimed Iran has a capability to reach London with long-range missiles. And yesterday, the Housing Secretary said there had been no assessment to substantiate the claim. I just wondered if you could explain that to me, because I don't really understand. Does that mean we haven't carried out an assessment, so we don't know, or we know it's definitely not true, we don't need an assessment?
I believe the Housing Secretary said that there's no assessment he has seen, there's no assessment that I've seen. But I'm not going to get into discussing Iran's targeting on this programme. I just think, and I thought it when I watched Steve yesterday on the rounds he did, it's deeply irresponsible to be commenting, and we don't routinely comment on the threats that we face as a country, not least due to intelligence sharing. What I want to stress to your viewers is we have the means necessary to defend this country from attacks on our own soil or from abroad. We've invested as a government in air and missile defence following the recommendations that came out of the Strategic Defence Review. So people can be reassured about that point. But I think what I say to the specific statement that's been made is, let's remember, Israel is an active participant in this conflict. And I think all the statements it makes need to be seen through that lens. I say nothing more than that.
OK, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Let's talk about new towns. 7 new towns. What's the plan?
Well, this is the first formal step we're taking to honour our manifesto commitment to deliver that next generation of new towns. We're going out to consult on the programme as a whole, and as you say, 7 proposed locations. And why is this important? We've always been clear as a government that to address the housing crisis, we've got to build at a larger than local scale. Bringing forward large-scale new communities, whether they're standalone settlements or urban extensions, is a means of addressing the housing crisis, allowing people who are desperate to buy their first home or get an affordable home to rent to get that place where they can live securely, and to unlock economic growth, because so many of our towns and cities are constrained, they're not reaching their full potential. So we're determined to get spades in the ground on at least 3 of these sites. We're going to go as fast as possible on the others. But we want to consult on the details of how we bring each of those 7 forward, whether they're the right choices, whether there are any reasonable alternatives.
You obviously pledged to build 1.5 million homes by the end of the Parliament. If you look at for example, the net additional dwellings figures for England's stock in the last year, 2024-25, it was actually less than the year before. Are you on track to reach that 1.5 million target?
We still think we can hit that target. It was an incredibly stretching target. We made no bones about that. We could have picked a far less ambitious one and hit it very easily. But the scale of the housing crisis is such that we need to have a really ambitious and stretching target. All of the net additional completion statistics that I've seen, they're not good, obviously, but they're fully expected, let me tell you, because all of those completions that have come through, if I just explain to your listeners the way the development cycle works, they're all planning applications that were submitted in the previous Parliament. And in that previous Parliament, we had a series of anti-supply changes to national planning policy made by the Conservatives, including the abolition of housing targets. So, of course, that's going to feed through. The headwinds from this conflict in the Gulf do not help. Let's be clear, that will, if it continues for any long period of time, have an impact on demand for new homes, but also building materials costs. So the headwinds are getting harder. But we still think we can achieve that target, and we're pulling every single lever in our power
Sounds like it's more of a wish than a expectation.
It's not a wish. We can do it, and it always was very... we were very clear, premised on a very steep increase in house building rates in the later years of this Parliament. But the headwinds are growing stronger, absolutely.
OK. Good to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for being with us. Well, coming up, of course, we'll be discussing that emergency Cobra meeting over Iran war. We're going to be discussing that a little bit more in just a few minutes' time.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think is really unusual? Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Welcome back. The Prime Minister will chair an emergency COBRA meeting today to discuss the cost of living impacts of the ongoing Iran war. He'll be joined by the Chancellor, the Foreign and Energy Secretaries, as well as the Governor of the Bank of England. But let's discuss all of this in more detail. We're joined by the former Foreign Office Policy Advisor on Iran, Charlie Gamble. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us. Look, we'll come to maybe some of the broader impacts in a second, but the headline question, can Iran reach the UK with its missiles?
So I think that's been a longer subject for debate and research amongst different governments in Europe, where the targets are, obviously, for these kind of intercontinental ballistic missiles. If you look at the negotiations that have happened between Iran and the US and Europe for the last 10 years, Iran's ballistic missile program has been at the forefront of that. And consistently, Iran has not given an inch on surrendering any of its ICBM technology or stopping research into sort of R&D on this to improve the accuracy of those ICBMs. So that will be a closely guarded bit of information for UK government and DI to think about. But it's clear that Iran has the intent, and scientifically it will be working towards the capability to have that kind of threat to the UK. And this is Iran looking to restore its deterrent around the world so that countries like the US and Europe and entities like Europe will not see Iran, or will not attack Iran further.
But I think it's fair to say that before the last few weeks, the assumption was at least that maybe they could reach southern Europe, but not northern Europe. Is that your interpretation of what our intelligence had suggested previously? And does the fact that they have maybe reached Diego Garcia, which of course is a long way to the east, change your perception of whether they could reach northern Europe?
So it's clear that their scientists have been working on this for a very long time, and they have very talented and capable scientists working on this. And the progress of their research could well have taken them to the UK or to Europe. I mean, I can't comment. I'm not in a position to comment on the exact accuracy and distance that these ICBMs can reach. But this has been a long-standing bit of Iran's military architecture for the last 20 years, and it's not impossible that their progress has taken them to a point where they can threaten Europe.
Could we intercept one of those missiles? Do we have that capability if it was heading for our shores?
So again, over the time of Iran's, in parallel to Iran's research into its ballistic missile program, the UK will have been doing research into countermeasures to understand how can they protect the UK against this kind of threat. And again, that's not really my area of expertise, but this is a live issue. But this won't be a surprise for policymakers in DI and in the UK military that Iran has an aspiration to have an ICBM that can hit Europe and that can potentially hit the UK. And in parallel to Iran's efforts, UK military scientists would have been working on countermeasures to protect us against this.
Clearly, there's been a lot of debate about what resources we had in the region and how quickly extra resources were sent there. How much discussion would have been going on in the Foreign Office in the months of January and February, for example, about the possibility of this sort of action? Clearly, the US was building up an armada of sorts in the region, and whether or not you would have expected more resources possibly to be sent there even before it all started.
I think that the challenge here is that the template since 2019, if you look at when Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC QF commander, was killed in Baghdad, Iran's response since then has always been very proportionate and very calibrated. And the message every time has been, we don't want a war, but we're ready to fight a war. And I think over those 6 years, Israel and potentially the US as well has looked at Iran's response. You look at Iran's response after Israel killed the struck the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Iran responded proportionately, potentially weak in Israel's eyes, and it was just to restore an element of deterrence, but to say, please, we'd like this to end. We don't want a war, but we're ready to fight one. I think what that's done is that's lulled Israel and America into a false sense of security about the ferocity with which Iran will respond. So perhaps the UK was in that same boat, saying Iran doesn't want a war, it would rather peace and it would rather de-escalation through diplomatic means. So I think there's a degree to which US, Israel, particularly the Gulf partners, have been caught off guard by the ferocity of Iran's response. And a lot of the frustration that is being expressed by Gulf partners towards the US is, how on earth did you not see the ferocity of Iran's response coming? So perhaps we would have been in the same boat as this. But then the contingency planning for these kind of things have been ongoing for a long time. But I think the ferocity of Iran's response has surprised a lot of people.
Charlie, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting. Charlie Gamble, their former Foreign Office policy advisor on Iran.
Now, there's a really interesting report we got to bring you, speaking to Iranian nationals living here in the UK and trying to find out what they think about the war, whether it is the right thing for Iran going forward.
Some are desperate for regime change and believe military action is the only way to achieve that. Others fear the fighting will only strengthen Iran. Ashish Joshi has been finding out why people are so divided on the topic.
I want a secular, democratic government. I'm not monarchist, but I respect Reza Pahlavi. All these opposition, they did nothing. I was a child, but they did nothing. The opposition, none of them did anything. But Reza Pahlavi, the thing I like about him is, first of all, he was brought up in Western country. So he knows freedom, what freedom means.
Is it okay for Iranian lives to be lost for what you want to achieve?
Unfortunately, this is what we have to. 47 years we have lost lives. God knows, how many people, but I think that if Israel and America, and I don't think that they are angels, no. We have problem with them as well. But if we didn't have Islamic Republic regime, they wouldn't come to Iran.
I've grown up going to Iran every summer, as much as we can afford. We speak Farsi in my home. I spoke Farsi before I spoke English. And I went to Iranian school every Saturday where I learned to read and write in Farsi. And I have always been extremely close with my family in Iran, extremely close. I personally cannot say that I am happy with bombs being dropped on my country where civilians are dying, and it's not in their interest, it's in the interest of US and Israel. However, what I do know is that this is a breaking point. We've never seen this amount of intervention and attack on the military, on the intelligence of the dictatorship that Iran has. Now we need to look at what do we do now? Whose voices do we listen to now? We listen to Iranians, all of them, not just monarchists. We also listen to Kurds. We also listen to Azadis, all the ethnic groups, all the religions. What did they want? Because we've never been asked this.
We'll bring you more on Ashish's report, including speaking to him later on the programme. But just to bring you a bit of an update on the story we've been reporting about this arson attack on 4 volunteer Jewish ambulances in North London, because the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has now tweeted about it, confirming it is an anti-Semitic attack. He said, "This is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. My thoughts are with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to this horrific news. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with any information must come forward to the police." So Keir Starmer there reacting to the attack on those ambulances.
And again, as we said earlier, he'll be holding a COBRA meeting later on today to discuss more broadly separate issues in Iran, a busy day ahead for him. Now, Sky News has tracked down a convicted fraudster who stole £300,000 from a pensioner and fled to Tenerife.
So Pamela Gwinnett raided the life savings of 89-year-old Joan Green after pretending to act as her carer during the pandemic.
Gwyneth isolated Joan, who you can see here, from her family and eventually convinced her to transfer power of attorney before raiding her finances. Joan died in 2022 and her family fears she passed away believing Gwyneth's lies.
So Gwyneth was given a 6-year prison sentence, but she fled the UK while she was on bail. But our reporter Phoebe Southworth managed to track her down. Here's what happened.
Armed with Gwyneth's address in Tenerife, we set off to find her. This is where Gwyneth has been hiding in Tenerife. She's become notorious among her neighbours.
It must be horrible to think that somebody's living it large on a sunny island when your family's still grieving.
What is your message to her? Is it to leave?
Go home and face justice.
We spotted Gwyneth leaving another resident's apartment, an elderly man who lives alone.
Who said that?
You're supposed to be serving a prison sentence. You got 6 years last year and you're here in Tenerife. Why are you back in the UK?
Because I've got an appeal going on.
So you're appealing it, so the judge was wrong? You shouldn't have got 6 years?
No.
Why's that? You did
Because
take your own money, didn't you?
No, never. A family took it. I'm her executor.
Why would
she
Joan
died?
have Botox?
She died. Joan didn't buy Botox.
The judge said Botox, expensive.
No,
it was a 22.5 grand
no,
car.
This is...
Is that what Joan wanted?
No, that was a business car.
You're going to go back and hand yourself in, Pamela?
No, because...
You've done nothing wrong, why are you here?
Because my appeal's going through.
Amazing reporting that from Phoebe Southworth, and we're going to be joined by her later. More you can watch on the Sky News website already.
Now, meanwhile, the government is pushing ahead with its plan to curb access to jury trials in England. And, of course, lots of campaign groups are very worried about the justice system being undermined. It has sparked, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a backlash.
The barrister, Michael Mansfield, joins us now from Belfast. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a quick summary of your view on this topic before we get into the details?
I've been practicing at the bar, doing criminal work for something like 50 years. And juries are at the centre of the justice system. I was going to say judicial, but it ought to be synonymous. Because they represent the public and because they also, in one sense, are the most democratic institution we've got, which means that random people come in and pass judgment. And personally, if I was on trial, I'd want a jury. I wouldn't want a judge who's hearing the same sort of material every day and will come to a risk coming to a jaundiced view.
I'm interested in what you said there about judges, about the fact that they hear the same thing every day, so they could be jaundiced by the system. Do you think that the justice you might get from a judge then could be, I guess, unsafe?
Yes, shortly. I mean, I think it's human nature. Any one person, man or woman, sitting in the same position day in, day out, hearing all kinds of explanations, some of them they'd heard before and so on, and you've got one mind instead of 12. And if you ask me what is the benefit, I hope it speaks for itself. Namely, where you have a diverse group of men, women, black, white, and so on a jury, coming together to take a decision about guilt or innocence in cases that are extremely important, and government obviously doesn't like some of the decisions that are made, but it's recognised that, and by judges as well, that they become case hardened because of this experience they have on a daily basis. Whereas you have a jury that may or may never have done a trial before in their lives, but they bring, as mostly they are addressed by judges, you bring your common sense to bear on this case.
It's interesting to hear you say that. And like you say as well, the kind of diversity, I guess, of the jury by its nature, different from a judge or magistrates as well. What would you say to the government then who, sit in the studio and they will make the case that, look, at the minute, the backlog is terrible, so people are not getting the justice that they deserve. Yeah. And so this is something that needs to happen. Yeah,
this is what I call the deception, because there is no proof, no evidence has been produced anywhere that the backlog of cases is stretching to 80,000 now and maybe rising to 100,000 by 2028. Of course, that is dreadful for everyone, including, of course, the victims. And one doesn't want that. But it's got nothing to do with use of jury trials. And there has been no evidence produced to show that there's a causal link between the two. In other words, we can demonstrate to you that a trial with a jury takes far longer and is causing a backlog. The backlog is recognised to have been caused by a lack of investment in the whole system for 20 to 25 years. This question has been raised many, many times. I'll give you one example. You've got jury centres of courts and so on standing empty because the government put on a cap to the number of days that a judge can sit. So this has really nothing to do with the jury being employed, but much more to do with a decrepit and neglected system.
Absolutely fascinating, Michael. I wanted to pivot, if we may, just to situations going on in the Middle East and the legality or illegality of British bases being used. And I just have a big picture question on this, which is when we saw the start of this conflict, we saw the UK government decide that things weren't legal to use British bases because of advice from the current Attorney General. And we saw the Shadow Attorney General tweet quite extensively his views as to why it would have been legal. And I just come back to the broad point, which is international law in these areas purely down to the interpretation of that law by any one individual? And is it, in fact, a grey area every single time?
No, it's a very clear area every single time. Our problem are megalomaniacs who are running the world or think they're running the world and want to run the world by force. My concern as a human rights lawyer and so on, over this period of time, I've already said, my worry is that the rule of law and all the efforts that were made at the end of the Second World War to ensure that we don't settle disputes or attitudes by what used to be called the gunboat diplomacy or now by drone diplomacy. In other words, you beat the other person up into submission. Now, that's what's happening, and the rule of law and the institutions of international law are being ignored. It's not that it's a grey area. They know perfectly well that this is an illegal war. You are not allowed internationally, because you don't like a regime, and I'm not trying to justify the regime at all. All I'm saying is, because you don't like a particular regime, somebody may not like our regime, that you can therefore invade that country to convert it to the kind of institution you want. There's no provision for that. That was the whole point of the United Nations Security Council and the General Assembly in 1945 to 1948. And that has all, as it were, crumbled for the moment because the pugilists, those waging war, just ignore it and carry on. And it's very difficult. There have been arrest warrants issued, as you know, by the International Criminal Court. But that was 2 years ago. Nobody's been arrested because, in fact, the court is being ignored.
Michael, thank you so much. Really great to have you and for jumping on that topic as well.
That's fine. Thank you.
Michael Mansfield, KC, with us there. We're going to have a quick look at the weather.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
It'll turn cooler and more unsettled this week with strong winds and showers or more prolonged rain at times. It'll be mainly sunny and dry this morning with early fog in the south lifting, but the far north can expect some wintry showers. The northwest looks quite cloudy too. Cloud there will extend over much of the north by midday, while the northwest of Ireland will see patchy rain moving in on strengthening winds. It'll turn out mild in the sunny south again, near average elsewhere.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
No time for the sport.
Come on, Will, just rip the band.
Yeah, we have to go through it.
We have to talk about it. Manchester City totally outplayed Arsenal to lift the Carabao Cup. Come on, be honest. Credit where credit's due. Securing the first major trophy of the season. Can't talk about the triple though. Not Arsenal, but 3 gold medals at the World Indoor Athletics.
Yes, we should lead on that.
Yes. Okay, Wilf. We'll see.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting. The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan. I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Middle East correspondent. We've just entered Gaza. The vista out there is complete destruction. I'll always remember going into Gaza City during the war. All around us was destruction and the sounds of battle. What you see a lot of here are military machines, soldiers, devastation and destruction. What you see very little of are the locals, the Gazans, the people who used to live here, the ghosts of this town. I witnessed the scars of the October the 7th attacks, burnt out homes, bullet holes in walls and bloodstains on the floor.
People were murdered. You have the black flag, you have the yellow flag, people were kidnapped.
Inside this convoy, prisoners released by Israel in exchange for their hostages. The Israelis insist that many of these prisoners are terrorists. But here, the Palestinians consider them a blend of freedom fighters and political prisoners. There were tears and there was defiance. This land has been farmed for hundreds of years, but now it's a scene of conflict. Israeli settlers have come to this area to seize land.
They've taken the land that I inherited from my father, and my father inherited from his father.
What would happen if you went over?
Oh, we'll be shot.
This is a place where the past is cherished, but the future is feared. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Sky News, get the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now? There was a football match last night, wasn't that, Wilf? What happened?
Alas.
What happened to it?
Do you know why it's so bad, this, Jackie?
Why is it so bad, Wilf?
Every single week, since we started the show, Sophie said Arsenal are going to choke, and we choked.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so damaging, is it was just...
It wasn't... Do you know what? I think Manchester City just came out in that second half. First half was even. They came out in the second half and they just went, right, we're going to get this game by the scruff of the neck and just grab it. And they
winning mentality.
And it was a winning mentality.
It's on every level. I can't run away from it.
Arsenal sort of shrank a bit. I think you can say that they didn't rise to the occasion.
Correct.
There are questions now being asked, why did he play his second-choice goalkeeper in a match you really wanted to win? David Raya has been a standout, not just goalkeeper, but player for the entire season. And it's all very well to say in hindsight that, Kepa's played the entire competition. It's only fair to let him play the final. I get all that. But if you really, really wanted to be sure that a mistake wasn't made, and a mistake was made by Kepa, which allowed them to get the first goal. But, hats off to Nico Riley for the header. Let's have a look at it. A couple of days after your 21st birthday and an England call-up, and then you put your team ahead in this fashion. Oh. At that point, Arsenal are like...
Sophie.
Sophie's laughing.
It's fair enough.
And you're sort of down. You're already down in the dumps, thinking, "Oh no."
Do you know the keeper thing was madness? Not to play your first team keeper, but it wasn't just that. We just didn't show up in the second half.
No, they didn't. They didn't go for it. You can say also that Pep did the same thing. He played James Trafford, his second-string goalkeeper, who made an amazing triple save at the beginning of that match, which we will show next time. By the way, I forgot to put it in. But yeah, Nico Riley.
I don't want to...
Fair. Sorry, you go ahead.
I don't want to laugh.
Enjoy your moment.
I don't want to laugh, obviously, and I feel the pain of Arsenal fans, but I have sat through quite a lot of talk of the quadruple.
Well, it's the quad still on because the treble plus Spurs going down. I'm just... We completely choked yesterday.
Yes.
But...
Right, let's just leave it there.
Let's
just leave it there.
What I say? What matters in life is how you pick up from failures. And there's still 3 months left of the season. I'm not expecting victory after yesterday, but we can come back from this.
It's a kick up the backside, for sure.
Today, pathetic. You should enjoy this. You are.
Can we talk about? Can we just?
We will
I'm going to cheer you up. Can we talk about Spurs?
Oh, yes.
Let's move on to the Premier League. So, Forest went to Spurs. Spurs have got a terrible home record, as we all know, and they had to win this match because they've been sucked into a relegation battle, and they were just above Forest. And Forest were amazing. 3 fantastic goals. And again, questions this morning over Igor Tudor's, who's very sadly had a family bereavement, but over his future. Can Spurs keep this manager? Do they want to? They've got to try and save their season. They are now just above the relegation places. Forest have taken 3 points and gone above them. It is a really dire situation. And just about the gold medals quickly, I know you're going to say that. 3 gold medals in the space of half an hour yesterday at the World Indoor Championships. We had Georgia Hunter-Bell in the 1,500 metres, Molly Cowdery in the pole vault after her disappointment of the Olympics, and then Keely Hodgkinson smashing the 800 metres in a new championship time a few weeks after breaking the world record. And then she ran the relay and did the fastest leg.
Gold medals for them, gold medals for Manchester City, alas.
Well done.
Jackie, thank you very much. We'll see you next hour. Sadly. Well, no, not sadly.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? They call him the king of the jungle. Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you? People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. We're trying to see as much as we can.
Good morning, it is 8 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
We're Sophy and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The Prime Minister condemns an anti-Semitic arson attack on Jewish volunteer ambulances in North London.
New York's LaGuardia airport is closed after a plane crashes into a ground vehicle on the runway, killing the pilot and the co-pilot.
The Prime Minister gets ready to chair an emergency Cobra meeting on the effect the Iran war is having on UK households after another phone call with Donald Trump last night.
Jackie will be back with the sport. Can't wait to see her. Not looking forward to the headlines, though. Manchester City triumph in the Carabao Cup final, beating Arsenal 2-0.
And we'll also bring you the extraordinary moment that Sky News tracks down and confronts a fraudster who conned an old lady out of her life savings before fleeing prison to Tenerife.
Hey, very good morning. We start with the breaking news. An anti-Semitic arson attack on a Jewish volunteer ambulance service in North London.
So 4 ambulances were outside a synagogue in Golders Green when they were set on fire last night about 1:45 in the morning. It's an attack the Prime Minister has labelled deeply shocking.
The London Fire Brigade say the vehicles were destroyed after cylinders inside the ambulances then exploded. It also caused windows to break in an adjacent block of flats.
The good news is that no injuries have been reported, but of course it's been condemned by many politicians. Oliver is there for us at the scene. Oliver, what more do we know?
Yeah, well, good morning, Sophie. This morning, Sky News has been invited into one of the properties where the glass has been completely broken out. The homeowners telling Sky News that they were woken up at about 1:40 in the morning to a huge orange glow that was filling their bedroom. They then ran into their children's bedroom where 4 children share bunk beds and quickly got them out of that room before the first of the ambulances started exploding. As you can see from this footage that we've gathered, the damage is really extensive to 3 of those 4 ambulances. Basically, only the shell and the carcass has been left. And you can see in some of the other shots that we've got some of the oxygen cylinders, which the authorities say was responsible for those blasts as the fire took hold and reached such a temperature that the gas canisters just exploded. London Fire Brigade says it received about 56 calls very early in the morning from concerned residents. And a lot of the people that we've been speaking to here, remember Golders Green has got a large Jewish community, is very concerned. They say that, it's something that, unfortunately, they had been preparing themselves for because in the aftermath of the October 7th terrorist attacks by Hezbollah in Israel, in the aftermath of the Heaton Park attack in Manchester, they say that there's been a rising number of anti-Semitic attacks. Now, the Metropolitan Police has issued a statement. It says an investigation has been launched after 4 ambulances belonging to the Jewish Community Ambulance Service were set on fire in Golders Green. Officers remain on scene and the arson attack has been treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. The statement goes on to say nearby houses have been evacuated as a precaution and road closures remain in place. No injuries have been reported and all the fires have been put out. We are aware of reports of explosions. This is believed to be linked to gas canisters on board the ambulances. We've also heard from the chief rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mervis. He says the deliberate arson attacks against Hatzola ambulances in London are a particularly sickening assault, not only on the Jewish community, but on the values we share as a society. Our Hatzola Volunteer Ambulance Corps is an extraordinary service whose sole mission is to protect life, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. The targeting of Hatzola by people so committed to terror, hatred and the desecration of life is a most painful illustration of the ongoing battle between those who sanctify life and those who seek to destroy it. Just to have a note there, the chief rabbi was using the word terror there. This isn't something that's so far been classified as a terrorist incident by the Metropolitan Police. Their exact wording that they are using is that this is an anti-Semitic hate crime. But from a lot of the people that we've been speaking to here, there is concern that once again, Britain's Jewish community has been targeted.
Oliver, thanks so much for that. Oliver there for us in northwest London. Well, the Prime Minister responded to the attack, posting this on social media. This is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. My thoughts are with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to the horrific news. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with any information must come forward to police.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Minister for Housing and Planning, Matthew Pennycook, who echoed those sentiments, but he did also say that he believed that London was a safe place to be Jewish.
This is a deeply shocking incident, as you know, on volunteer Hatzola ambulances that serve the Jewish community. I think our thoughts in the first instance, obviously, are with the volunteers who man that service, with the wider community who'll be feeling understandably concerned. The Met are investigating the incident as an anti-Jewish hate crime. If that is confirmed, I just want to be really clear, that would be an affront to the Jewish community in this country, but not only an affront to the Jewish community, an attack on us all, because there can be absolutely no place for anti-Semitism, for anti-Jewish hatred in this country. And sadly, I think it reinforces the need, as our department is doing, to invest in things like the Community Security Trust, which provides security to Jewish schools, synagogues and others. But it's deeply concerning.
Matthew Pennycook there earlier on the programme. We'll have more, of course, on that throughout the morning. Let's bring you another breaking story from overnight. There's been a plane crash at New York's LaGuardia airport, which has killed 2 people.
We're showing you there the live picture there from the scene there in New York. So it was an Air Canada plane. It was landing when it collided with the ground vehicle just before midnight. We do also know that both the pilot and the co-pilot have been killed. Passengers reportedly injured as well. The passenger list shows there were around 72 people on board that plane, and the airport currently closed.
LaGuardia, of course, one of the 3 main airports that serves New York, along with JFK and Newark. LaGuardia tends to be for more domestic flights. But seeing that shut, and as it is now, is really quite striking. Some of the pictures we've seen as well of the plane do show the damage, and kind of, if indeed it is 2 that have died, it's incredibly tragic. It could have been worse, perhaps. But anyway, more on that when we have it.
Well, let's bring you the latest now on the war in Iran, because there's been a few key developments that are happening or are going to happen, including this Cobra meeting, the Prime Minister convening the emergency committee to look at how the war is impacting the British economy. And that's after he spoke to President Trump on the phone last night. Also this weekend, President Trump laid down an ultimatum for Iran. Open the Strait of Hormuz this evening, or the US would obliterate Iran's power plants. Well, Sally Lockwood's in Dubai for us with the latest. Sally, clearly the scale of attacks picked up late last week, including specifically what has been targeted. What's the latest on that exchange of fire over the course of the last 24 hours? And how is it altering how the different regional powers view this conflict?
Yeah, good morning to you both. Certainly, I think we've adapted to a new normal here in the UAE, as have other Gulf countries, of these daily interceptions of missiles and drones. The air defences certainly here have been doing a great job. And I think residents have got used to this. They feel largely safe. But certainly I would say that in the last 24 hours, there have been more residents expressing a slight unease to me, given the escalatory language and threats that we're now hearing from both sides, and just the trajectory in which this war is moving. And certainly, you know, this morning we've had shelter-in-place orders already here just before 7 o'clock in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. A missile was intercepted over an industrial area in Abu Dhabi heading towards the US military base Al Dhafra, and we understand that an Indian resident was injured by falling shrapnel. Bahrain, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have all reported similar incoming fire overnight. But certainly it is this deadline that Donald Trump set, giving Iran 48 hours to essentially reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or to see their oil plants targeted, starting with the largest first, as he put it. And certainly this is causing a lot of concern, because Iran has responded saying, well, if you do that, we are going to retaliate and we will be targeting energy infrastructure belonging to the US and Israel, as well as potentially IT infrastructure and desalination plants, which are crucial to this region for drinking water. And this does represent a potential dangerous turning point in this war if these threats are kept to. And certainly a lot of people are asking, well, why has Donald Trump set himself this very firm deadline of 48 hours, which is tomorrow morning, in the early hours of the morning, local time here? And why has he detailed such specific consequences? Because it does make it much harder for him to step back. And let's not forget, he's also got thousands of Marines and sailors making their way to this region from the Sea of Japan, and we don't yet know what they're going to be used for. We don't even know if Donald Trump knows yet what they're going to be used for. But certainly the language and the threats are causing a lot of concern here, because people have got used to this new normal in the last 3 weeks or so. And I think there is a concern that if these threats are followed through, we could be looking at a dangerous new phase of this war.
Well, on that very note, Sally, we're going to pick up and see how the markets are interpreting all of this. And it's a day of significant volatility once again. Asian markets were sharply lower. We saw moves of 2 or 3% for an individual day. Of course, that is significant. Here's the oil price chart. Now, you're probably getting quite used to seeing this. In fact, this morning, oil prices haven't moved that much more. We're at about 112, 113 for Brent crude. But it comes not just after, of course, a sharp increase since the start of this war, but a sharp increase again last week. So it's not just been an initial move, it's been persistent, and up at, excuse me, $112, $113 for oil really will impact economies around the world, particularly here in Europe. Now, we talked about, does this lead to contagion to other asset classes, to other parts of the market? And what really took off last week was British borrowing costs, the bond market really reacting. It had done at the beginning, but last week it really kicked up a gear. So here is the UK 10-year borrowing cost. It's perhaps the best indicator for how much the UK has to pay to borrow money. Now, it picked up at the start of the war, of course, when we came into March. Last week at the Bank of England meeting, they kept rates on hold, and yet on Thursday and Friday, we really saw our borrowing costs pick up. We touched 5%, which was a really kind of headline-grabbing moment on Friday, and then closed just below 5%. Well, this morning we've moved up again. We're now above 5%. Not just is that the highest UK 10-year borrowing cost for the last 6 months, it's the highest for 18 years. It's the highest since before the financial crisis in 2008. Let's look at the one-year borrowing cost as well, because this gives a sort of better indication for the short-term cost of borrowing for what we might see the Bank of England do. We started the war down at about 3.5%. When the Bank of England rate is at 3.75, that was suggesting that people expected a rate cut. We're now up at 4.5%. We're up again today. And this is really the key point this morning. Thursday and Friday saw an unprecedentedly large move up in our borrowing costs. There was questions, therefore, about would that continue this week, or will we breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief? Well, we're not breathing that sigh of relief. This is up again this morning. It's at 4.6%, so up a tick from here. And I just want to also just give one snapshot about the scale with which this is affecting us more than others. The US started the war around the same level. Actually, it was about a bit below, 3.4%. It's risen as well. It's starting to see the pressures in its bond market, but only to 3.7%. So you're talking about a move from about here to here if we're looking at the US one-year borrowing cost. The UK really exposed in a pronounced way. And, of course, this will pressure everything that the government's trying to do. And, Sophie, with that in mind, no surprise that the Bank of England governor has been called into the COBRA meeting that's taking place today in Downing Street. Yeah, that was so significant, I thought, that they have got the Bank of England governor in there. And I guess that's mortgage rates in particular is something that they're worried about, but all kinds of other things too, right? Everything the government does. You know, just as a reminder, why are we so exposed? We are a net energy importer, so this hits our overall economy more than others because we have to buy more higher-priced fossil fuels. But we are, as a government, spending about 42% of GDP, whereas tax take is 37% of GDP. So just to remind, that is every year we have to borrow 5% of GDP to keep the lights on. So essentially, when there is a shock, and it's not our shock, it's an external shock, but when there is a shock, are we able to be flexible and dynamic? No. And just talking about that, Andrew Bailey being in there, because obviously they're independent, so, you know, the Keir Starmer can't be like, do this to interest rates. Is it more about them just having an open discussion about where they are and any particular levers the government can pull? Yeah, and by the way, the Bank of England could step in and start buying bonds again. And by the way, if they did that, our borrowing costs would come down immediately. But there's a big problem. why it's much, much harder for the Bank of England to step in today in a way that they did after the financial crisis or that they did after COVID. In both those moments, there was no inflation. In fact, there was even fears of deflation. What happens if the Bank of England steps in and injects lots of money and starts buying bonds? It will be very inflationary. So this is the massive problem we have right now, is the solution, the toolbox that's been used, the go-to solution in the last 20 years, essentially, print money, inject liquidity and kick the can down the road for future, is much, much harder to do this time around because it will be inflationary, and we've already got inflation.
And from the political perspective as well, you know, this is a government that has put bringing down the cost of living right at the centre of its pitch to voters. It's what they've been talking about. It's what 2026 was supposed to be all about. And we're in a situation where...
I can't actually believe that borrowing costs are up again to the extent they are this morning. The UK 10-year is at 5.05%. I mean, this is a huge, huge increase in the space of a couple of weeks. Again, by the way, just to put in context, this is markedly higher than we were in 2022 during the mini-budget. The pace with which it's increased, not quite as pronounced. It's been weeks, not days. And of course, the trigger for that increase is external. Whereas the trigger of the mini-budget was the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's own doing, internal. But what you would say is the scale of increase we are seeing now, Thursday, Friday in particular, and the fact it's continuing today is kind of unprecedented. So the 10-year borrowing cost has gone from 4.25% to 5.05% in a matter of weeks. That is, you know, you talked about when she gave the spring statement, the Chancellor, a few weeks ago, and things being all the forecasts being slightly out of the window. I mean, try that times 10 now. I mean, the borrowing costs surging this extent is a huge problem for us.
Yeah, well, we're continuing to talk about the impact here on the UK and also, of course, the geopolitical situation as well. Sky's Yada Hakim is going to have a special programme on the Iran war live from Beirut at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Now, Sky News has tracked down a convicted fraudster who stole £300,000 from a pensioner and fled to Tenerife.
Pamela Gwinnett raided the life savings of 89-year-old Joan Green after pretending to act as her carer during the pandemic.
Gwinnett isolated Joan, who you can see here from her family, and eventually convinced her to transfer power of attorney before raiding her finances. Joan died in 2022, and her family fears she passed away believing Gwinnett's lies.
Well, Gwinnett was handed a 6-year prison sentence, but she fled the UK while she was on bail. Well, our reporter, Phoebe Southwark, managed to track her down.
Armed with Gwinnett's address in Tenerife, we set off to find her. This is where Gwinnett has been hiding in Tenerife. She's become notorious among her neighbours.
It must be horrible to think that somebody's living it large on a sunny island when your family's still grieving.
What is your message to her? Is it to leave?
Go home and face justice.
We spotted Gwinnett leaving another resident's apartment, an elderly man who lives alone.
Who said that?
You're supposed to be serving a prison sentence. You got 6 years last year and you're here in Tenerife. Why aren't you back in the UK?
Because I've got an appeal going on.
So you're appealing it, so the judge was wrong? You shouldn't have got 6 years?
No.
Why's that? You took Joan's money, didn't you?
No, never. A family took it. I'm her executor.
Why would Joan have Botox?
She died. Joan didn't buy Botox.
The judge said Botox, expensive.
No,
this was $22.5 grand car.
This is...
Is that what Joan wanted?
No, that was a business car.
Are you going to go back and hand yourself in, Pamela?
No, because...
If you've done nothing wrong, why are you here?
Because my appeal's going through.
Well, Phoebe's here with us. Phoebe, amazing piece, and the full piece, by the way, is on the Sky News website if you haven't seen it yet. So why has she not been extradited? Is that a silly question?
No, absolutely not. I think at this stage, we don't yet know when she's going to be leaving Tenerife. And that's because even though we do have an extradition agreement with Spain, we don't yet know when the Spanish authorities are going to make that arrest. And we did contact them and ask, but they haven't responded.
Can I ask, not to get you to give away all your kind of like journalistic practices, but how did you find her? Was it hard? Was it easy?
So all the credit goes to Joan Green's family for this because they were so upset that Joan didn't have justice, that Pamela Gwinnett was not in the country serving her sentence. They got news articles essentially from when Pamela was sentenced, and they pasted it all over social media on groups for expatriates in Tenerife, and they said, if anyone knows this woman, please can they come forward and tell us where she is? And lo and behold, one of Pamela's neighbours wrote back and said, she's my neighbour. Wow. I've seen her. Wow. She's around all the time.
And just to state the obvious, I mean, despite her saying she's awaiting appeal, if she was in the UK, she'd be behind bars.
Yeah, absolutely. She said in the videos you saw, I'm appealing my sentence, and she said the judge was wrong. We know that she has filed an application to appeal against her sentence and her conviction, but there's no evidence at all yet that that will be successful.
And I mean, I would have thought UK and Spain extradition things are quite seamless, aren't they? I mean, we're not talking about, you know, countries where we don't have diplomatic relations. Is it typical that these things take time?
It is typical, and we know that the extradition process only began in October last year. So despite the fact that Pamela Gwinnett's been in Tenerife for the last 11 months, they waited until her trial had concluded at the end of October before launching that process. So it has only been a matter of months, and these things do take time. There's a strong possibility she will be arrested in Spain and brought before the court there, and then she'll have a choice whether she wants to appeal or whether she will allow herself to be extradited. And from that video, it sounds quite likely she's going to try and fight it at every stage.
Not bad life in Spain. Given the weather we've been having at the beginning of the year over here, I think some people would be thinking, watching this, I mean, how was it, did it go down? I saw you speaking to some of her neighbours.
Yeah, I mean, they're incredibly frustrated. Gareth, who you saw on the video there, is running that complex where she's living, and he said that people are constantly, you know, pointing and sort of saying, oh, look, that's her, that's the woman who defrauded that elderly lady. And it's incredibly stressful for them. They just essentially want her to go. It's causing disruption. They want Joan's family to have the justice they deserve.
Phoebe, great stuff, and the full piece on the Sky News website now?
Yep, absolutely.
Great work from Phoebe there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the impact of the Iran war at home, and in particular focusing in on petrol prices. We'll be right back.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think?
It's really unusual.
Mornings with Rich and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Welcome back. Tehran's attempt to target Diego Garcia, the joint UK-US military base in the Chagos Islands, has ignited fears that Iranian missiles could potentially reach London. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu argues it's why other leaders must step up, although our government insists the claims aren't substantiated. The former deputy head of the Israel National Security Council, Iran Etzion, joins us now from Jerusalem. Really great to have you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. What do you make of what's been revealed, I guess, in recent days about Iran's missile capability, particularly how far they can go?
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. As far as I understand, this contradicts a lot of the assessments, both on the American intelligence side, Israeli intelligence side, and I don't know about the British, but it is a surprise. It does have strategic significance, but I wouldn't exaggerate it. Again, as far as we know, it's not as if they have the full-scale capacity to hit European capitals. Neither do necessarily they have the intention. Always when we look at threats, we look at the combination of capabilities and intentions. So I think more than anything right now, it's a publicity stunt for those who are trying to magnify the threat, but there is no need to magnify the threat. It's very clear.
A publicity stunt by the Israeli side or the Iranian side?
Maybe both. The Iranians obviously are looking to deter, and the Israelis are looking, Netanyahu specifically, he's been at it for 40 years. He is looking to magnify the Iranian threat. And under the current circumstances, that is not really necessary. I mean, there is a wide-ranging understanding of the nature of the Iranian threat. The question is not the nature of the threat. The question is, what is the appropriate response? What is the achievable goal of this regional war that Netanyahu launched? These are the real questions, rather than the nature of the threat.
What is your assessment for the extent to which their threat, their capability has been diminished over the last 3 weeks? What are they left with?
They are left with some residual capabilities, and it's unclear to what extent they can actually rebuild them under the current circumstances. But again, as far as I understand, and obviously I'm not privy to any classified information, as far as I understand, they do have ongoing capability to produce missiles, certainly to produce drones, which are much easier to produce. And because it's such a large country, and because they have been preparing for this war for a long time, and they probably understood that it's coming, they have been prepared, probably more so than the Americans and the Israelis predicted. And evidently they are surviving.
What about Israel's stocks and supplies of weapons?
That is always a constraint. Again, obviously, I don't know exactly what the situation is. Israel also has been preparing for a long time for this. According to open source information, Netanyahu immediately after the 12-day war, while on the one hand saying that, we won, we abolished the threat, there is no longer an Iranian threat, neither on the nuclear or the missile side. Simultaneously, he gave the instructions to the Israeli military and intelligence and Mossad and so on to prepare for the next war. So he knew that he wasn't telling the truth. He knew that the threat was still there. And to what extent right now Israel is capable to continue with respect to its counter-missiles capabilities is an open question. And I'm quite sure the Iranians are acutely aware of this problem. Both sides are obviously trying to stretch the envelope of their capabilities, and the Iranians are under much more pressure, but they're less vulnerable, and because they're a dictatorial regime fighting for its survival, it's very different from the situation either in the Gulf or in Israel.
How committed do you think Israel is, put the US aside for a moment, Israel is to getting regime change? And if they are entirely committed to that, what does it mean about how long this war will persist and what they'll need to do next?
I'm quite sure that Netanyahu, when he initiated this war, wanted to go all the way. This was his, at first, clandestine ambition. I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago. And over the years, it developed. And I think during the 12-day war, once he witnessed the degree of success, he already then wanted to go all the way and was blocked by Trump. And now, between the 12-day war and this round, he was able to convince Trump as a person, rather than the American system as a system, that there is an opportunity to topple the regime. And I'm quite sure that this was the actual intent and the actual goal discussed in closed rooms. But because both military establishments and intelligence establishments were skeptical, and rightfully so, about the possibility of actually doing that only via military means and without a massive Iranian opposition, armed, organized on the ground, and without land invasion like the Americans did in Iraq or Afghanistan, it's next to impossible, and certainly not something that you can build on in terms of planning. So the goal was there. The problem was presented by the professional echelons. There was no public debate, neither in the US nor in Israel. And again, this was the willful intent of both Trump and Netanyahu to conceal it from the public. And they launched it. I'm quite sure that Netanyahu is still committed to it. I'm much less certain about Trump. He has his own political vulnerabilities. The war is popular in Israel, but it's not popular in the US. So I think there is already a divergence.
Iran, thank you so much. Oh, forgive me. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll talk more about the impact of the war on people at home. And just a reminder of what the financial markets are doing this morning. The FTSE 100 is down 1.5%. Oil prices are only up a little bit more, Sophie, 1.5% this morning, but obviously very elevated. Brent crude's at $114 a barrel. But perhaps most focus this morning is on borrowing costs. The UK 10-year borrowing cost up again is at 5.06%. First time it's above 5%. Briefly on Friday, again today, since 2008.
And look, this is going to feed through onto families across the UK, cost of living. This is why, of course, Keir Starmer's got this emergency COBRA meeting calling in the Bank of England governor as well. And one of the places that is really at the sharp end of this is petrol and people who drive cars. We can speak now with the Executive Director of the Petrol Retailers Association, Gordon Barmer. Great to have you on the programme. Just talk to us, what is happening when it comes to petrol prices right now?
In one word, increasing, unfortunately. Yeah, that's the problem.
How much have they risen in the last couple of weeks? If we're talking about raw commodity prices up 50, 60%, how much have petrol pump prices gone up?
Well, we've seen the price rise about 9% for petrol, which is 12 pence a litre, and diesel has gone up 24 pence. That's a 17% increase. But more worrying, obviously, our retailers have to replace product. So petrol's gone up 16% in terms of their cost, their buying costs of fuel, and 28% for diesel. And on Friday night, or the Friday trading day, I got a report that it was up again. So, unfortunately, all the trends are upwards at the moment.
We got an email in to Cheat Sheet, which is a podcast that me and Wilf do in the morning, from a woman called Joanne who works on a farm. And she was talking about the price of red diesel, and she was saying how this has gone up, through the roof, and that it could have an impact on food prices as well when you see, the people who are supplying the food having this increase in costs. Is that something you're worried about?
Absolutely. We supply, obviously, a lot of haulage through our members' forecourts, and we move, I think, about 90% of our food and raw materials in the UK. So any increase to fuel prices is obviously going to feed through to the cost of food and other raw materials as well. So this is extremely worrying, in terms of what we're going through at the moment.
Gordon, there's been a lot of talk about price gouging and making sure that doesn't happen. Are you confident that your members won't price gouge?
Absolutely. I've met with the Chancellor and the Energy Minister 2 weeks ago to refute some of those claims. What they need to understand is our members buy on a number of different pricing platforms. So some can be 3 weekly, some can be fortnightly, weekly, or even daily. And this is the price of the wholesale price of fuel that is then priced into their deliveries. So, for example, if you're on a daily lag, yesterday's price will apply to deliveries for today, and obviously that then has to be factored into your pump price. If you're on a longer term lag, then it takes some further time to feed through into the pump price. But no, I mean, it's not in any of our members' interests to do what you've said. They rely on repeat loyal business, and many of them, don't forget, are in local communities that rely on their petrol station to get fed and fueled. So it's in nobody's interest to take advantage of this situation.
Obviously, as we said in the intro, if the raw commodity price is up 50, 60% and petrol prices are up 20, 30%, it's at this point anyway, doesn't feel like profiteering. That said, you know, we're often talking about the likes of BP, Shell, Tesco's, who we buy our, and many other companies who we buy our petrol from, and they do, in absolute terms, make, you know, billions of pounds in profits. Do they have some headroom where they could cut their customers some slack, certainly if this proves just to be a temporary increase in oil prices?
Well, you're talking about multinational, fully integrated oil companies, and their business units or their profits are the culmination of many business units across many countries. As far as I know, the oil companies operate roughly 1,000 forecourts in the UK, but they're under the same pressure as you know, independents and supermarkets. They have to make money on that standalone business. They can't cross-subsidise one business against another.
Gordon, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gordon Barmer from the Petrol Retailers Association there.
Well, we'll be talking a bit about the cost of living today, of course, but there's a lot going on in the military and the geopolitical stage as well. So good time to bring in our security and defence analyst, Michael Clark. I just want to get your reaction to this kind of war of words going on at the minute between Donald Trump and Iran. He seems to have set them, like a 24-hour ultimatum on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, which expires just before midnight tonight, if he meant what he said. I think it's a sign that politically the war is now spinning out of control. I mean, militarily, the Americans know what they're doing. They're working through a target set. They're at sort of stage 3. They're getting down to the tactical level, and they'll continue to do that. The Israelis know what they're doing in terms of the targets they're going for. But politically, the president's casting round for options, either to get him out of this war or somehow to make the Iranians do something different on the Strait of Hormuz. So politically, he's sort of thrashing about, and the Iranians, they think they're winning. Clearly, look, they're setting conditions now. They're saying, well, you know, the United States can stop bombing, but we want them to leave all of their bases. We want the Gulf states to reconstruct Iran after this war. Now, there's zero chance they will be acceptable. But the fact that the Iranians are even thinking in terms of their conditions shows that in their mind, they're going to win. They think they will outlast Donald Trump, and therefore they can set conditions. Now, both sides now are spinning out of control because both sides politically are in the realm of fantasy.
Michael, I wanted to get your take on how easy it is if either side wants to hit energy infrastructure. I mean, clearly we've been talking about the ability for missiles to be intercepted, and that's happened in both directions the last couple of days. Last couple of weeks. Is the only reason we haven't seen energy infrastructure hit more significantly in the first few weeks a question of choice as to what's targeted? And if either side suddenly says we're going to go after energy infrastructure in a big way, will it be huge destruction of those targets?
It could be, yeah. I mean, I think it is largely a matter of choice. Both sides haven't chosen to go after energy infrastructure because it's a very serious thing to do, and it, you know, not to mention the fact it's against the Geneva Conventions, the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the additional protocols of 1977. It is strictly illegal to harm deliberately civilian infrastructure in order to hurt civilians as a means of political pressure. So it's, you know, if anybody cares about that these days, it's deeply illegal. I think both sides have resisted doing that because it will take the war to a different level. Now, could they do it? Yes, of course. There are any number of power plants a lot of power plants in Iran. Interestingly, everyone's focused on Bushehr, the only nuclear power plant they have on the Gulf Coast, because Donald Trump said, and I'll start with the biggest. Well, Bushehr isn't the biggest by any stretch. It's about the 5th or 6th biggest. It produces less than 1,000 megawatts, and they've got oil and gas-fired plants that produce 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts. So it's not the biggest, but it's the one everyone's focused on. And the Iranians, They've said that they'll go for power plants and desalination plants. Now, could they hit them? Well, there's enough of them that they could if they direct enough missiles and drones at them. They get through with a few of them. So, you know, as of tomorrow, if this, you know, deadline runs out and President Trump decides he is going to do something, then as of tomorrow, then quite a lot of plants could be hit, and desalination plants could be hit, you know, that same day. So tomorrow is a big day militarily to see if this war really is going to ramp up to another level.
The other thing I was going to ask you about is there's been this debate about whether or not Iran could hit London with missiles. This was the claim by Israel. We spoke to the Labour minister about this earlier, and he said Israel's an active participant in this conflict. All the statements it makes need to be seen through that lens. In other words, don't trust.
Yes, they would say that,
well, they would say that. What is the truth? Do we know?
Well, we don't. I mean, I'm a bit sceptical anyway, because we don't know. These two missiles that were sent towards Diego Garcia, 4,000 kilometres, we don't know how far they got. One of them fell short, one was shot down. We don't know where it was shot down. I'd take a bit of convincing that they could get 4,000 kilometres. All Iranian missiles, even the biggest, were tested at 2,000. Now, the Iranians, we could see them testing at 2,000 kilometres, and the Iranians made a political point in their own minds of saying, look, 2,000 kilometres covers Israel, but it doesn't cover Europe, so Europe is OK. That's what they believed. The only missile that might have been capable would be the Ghada-2, which is a two-stage missile. So it's got a liquid fuel first stage and a solid fuel second stage. If it was possible that they extend, probably not the liquid stage, there's only so much fuel you can stick in a tube, but maybe if their solid fuel had improved, they could get more out of the second stage and stretch it towards maybe 4,000 kilometres. But I haven't seen it. I think it's still a bit unlikely. And why would they want that? I mean, they like the idea that they've had the effect by targeting Diego Garcia with something. They've had the effect they wanted to have of causing a certain amount of comment and panic in Europe, that Europe is somehow vulnerable. That's what they would like to think. They didn't think that a couple of weeks ago. They didn't want to make Europe nervous, but now they do want to make Europe nervous because we're in a war.
What missile defences do we have here? I mean, I think we've all agreed. It sounds a bit exaggerated. We're all taken back to the case for the Iraq War and things like that. That said, can't we ask that question right now? What missile defences do we have here, hypothetically?
Hypothetically, none.
None?
All right, none. Well, all right, we've got our Type 26s, of which, you know, one is going to Cyprus and the other one is in the North Atlantic. So we've got two available. Two Type 26 destroyers have got the Sea Viper missile, and that can bring down a ballistic missile. So the Sea Viper system, and Sea Scepter is another one, with the Aster missiles. And they're capable. But that's it. I mean, beyond that, the Army's got Starstreak, which is a tactical defence, and the Air Force has got Meteor missiles on their Typhoons. So in theory, you could have a Typhoon up. But I mean, a Meteor missile against an incoming ballistic missile, which is dropping really very, very fast, that's a good shot.
I mean, look, I'm not a military expert, but we've been unveiling weapons like tanks, for example. Like, isn't modern-day warfare all about the air? Like, shouldn't we be investing more in defence systems and all that kind of thing?
The thing is, Sophie, until very recently, until the last 10 or 15 years, we assumed that any war against Britain that threatened the British homeland would be the Third World War against the Soviet Union. And that would very, very quickly escalate to something very serious, and then we'd fall back on our nuclear deterrent. So we have a nuclear deterrent. At any moment, now as we speak, there's one nuclear submarine somewhere under the Atlantic with its missiles available to fire 55 minutes after the Prime Minister gives the order. And we always thought, well, that's it. We don't try and defend. We deter, because any war would be so serious that we'd be into that territory. Now, here we are with a regional war, and with modern technologies, with smaller states, not just the old Soviet Union, with ballistic missiles, suddenly we think, actually, maybe a rogue actor could hit us. It's only recently that we started to worry about Cyprus. Maybe a rogue actor could hit Cyprus. We always thought Cyprus was safe in the past because there's nobody around with anything that could really target it. So now here we are, back in the realm of thinking maybe we've got to defend ourselves. But air defence is very, very expensive, and we've not done it traditionally. So we've got bits and pieces of defence, and we claim it as a multi-layered defence. But, I mean, we'd need a ring of, I don't know, 10 or 15 destroyers, all with their Sea Viper missiles, to defend the sort of east coast of Britain.
Can I just ask one final thing on this? I mean, the other thing I imagine you'd say that the last decade has been the assumptions based on is that we'd always be very tightly aligned with the US. on anything. Do you still think that's the case? And if it's not, what does it imply for... I mean, in the short term, there's no money available, as we've been talking about with bond yields. What does it imply about where our defence spending needs to get to?
Well, it implies that we're effectively on our own. As far as the Trump administration is concerned, Europe is not a priority. And if the Europeans find themselves in some sort of militarised incident, say with Russia, or with Iran for that matter, effectively we're on our own. And that shouldn't be so scary to us, given that Europe is so wealthy, but we haven't spent our money on much defence in the past, and we're going to have to in the future. And you're absolutely right. Until the first Trump administration, so until 2016, that British-American assumption that we wouldn't go to war without the United States wasn't just made, it was written into official documents. We would expect to be fighting with the United States in any defence of Europe. Now, you can't say that anymore. So Europe is in a different territory now, which intellectually, leaders in Europe have adjusted to that, but their politics haven't adjusted to it, and I don't think their publics have either. You know, we've had so long now, we've had 30 years, 40 years of a welfare state, and now we've got to think a bit more about a warfare state, or get the balance between a welfare state and a warfare state back into some sort of, not equity, but differently, so that we can offer our public some sort of adequate defence without the United States. And whatever happens after Trump, and I think, you know, the MAGA republicanism may last quite a long time, but whatever happens, we will never go back to the America that we had 20 years ago. It'll always be different from here on.
It's so interesting to talk. Thank you so much, as always.
Literally, you cannot ask him anything he doesn't know the answer to.
It's true. If you do have any questions, always let us know. We'll try and, of course, always get the answers as well. Thank you very much.
Let's have a quick look at the weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
It's going to turn cooler and more unsettled this week with some strong winds, showers and also, I'm afraid, some more prolonged rain at times as well. But it will be mainly sunny and dry, at least this morning, with some early fog in the south listing. The far north can expect some wintry showers, though, and the northwest looks pretty cloudy as well. The cloud there will extend over much of the north by midday, and the northwest of Ireland will then see some patchy rain moving in on strengthening winds. But it will turn out mild in the sunny south, again, nearer average elsewhere.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Manchester City won. Who did they win against, Wilf?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about.
Some team.
We have to talk about it, Wilf. We'll just rip the plaster off. We'll talk about it.
At least I'm here with you.
It's fine. I know, a bit of solidarity. It's a hard morning. We just need to rise above it and get through it and move on. Arsenal, well, they were just totally outplayed. Totally outplayed by Manchester City, who lifted the League Cup yesterday. What was interesting was how much it meant to Pep Guardiola after, you know, his 5th win. You'd have thought, boring. No, he absolutely was over the moon. So we'll be showing the action from that. And also, we can talk about the triple, not the actual triple, but the triple gold that the Golden Girls of Team GB delivered in half an hour at the World Indoor Athletics Championships last night. We'll have the action from that too.
Oh, actually, guys, we're not going to go to break because there's a press conference just beginning. We told you about the plane crash in LaGuardia earlier. Let's join the press conference there.
Are we good?
Beginning now.
Good morning. At approximately 11:40 last night, Air Canada Flight 8646, operated by Jazz, collided with the Port Authority aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicle on runway 4. The plane carried 72 passengers and 4 crew. The ARFF vehicle carried 2 officers. In accordance with our emergency plan, our mutual aid partners, FDNY and NYPD, immediately responded. Initial numbers indicate that 41 passengers and crew were transported to the hospital, as well as the ARF officers. At this time, we understand that 32 have been released, but there are also serious injuries. Sadly, Sadly, the 2 pilots are confirmed deceased, and notifications are being made by Air Canada's care team at this time. Families were directed to the Air Canada ticket counter to be reunited with their families, and we understand that the 1 unaccompanied minor has been reunited with their families. It is anticipated that the airport will be closed at least until 2 p.m. this afternoon to facilitate the investigation by NTSB, which has already begun to be on site. At this time, I'll take any questions.
Hello, Shimon Progress from CNN. Can you just tell us the rescue vehicle that was on its way somewhere? Can you give us any details about what put that in that position?
Certainly, the vehicle was responding to another aircraft operated by United that had reported an issue with odor. The NTSB will investigate exactly what went on in this crash, and I will defer to them in all of those aspects.
In terms of when the plane landed, like how soon after did the crash occur to when exactly?
The collision occurred during landing.
Do you know what speed the plane was moving when it collided with that vehicle?
NTSB will determine what the speed of the aircraft at the time.
Any indication of air traffic control shortages and if that was?
Again, I will refer to NTSB, who will make that determination on who was in the control tower at the time.
Was anyone ejected from that aircraft?
We're going to leave that to be part of the investigation at this time as we're going through family notifications.
Can you update the condition again of the two?
So just a reminder of those latest numbers. Sadly, 2 casualties, the pilot and the co-pilot from that plane crash late last night at LaGuardia airport. 72 passengers and 4 crew were on board. 2 officers were in the vehicle on the ground. Of that, 41 were taken to hospital. 31 have been released. There are some serious injuries amongst the remaining 10, but for now, just the 2 casualties, the pilot and the co-pilot. We'll bring you more when we have it.
Jackie is with us here with the sporting news, aren't you, Jackie? What can you bring us?
Yeah, well, yesterday, Arsenal fans full of great hope for the quadruple. This is the first trophy they can go for, and it all went so terribly wrong in the second half against Manchester City. And, kudos to Manchester City yesterday because they really took that match to Arsenal in the second half and were just so much better in all departments. I think one of the Sky Sports stats said at one point in that second half, or for the most of the second half, they had 80% possession, 80% possession, which Arsenal just couldn't get near them. Nick O'Reilly, the 21-year-old who celebrated his birthday at the weekend, was the hero of the hour for City. We can have a look at the goals for you. The first goal was a mistake by the Arsenal goalkeeper. Now, the Arsenal goalkeeper was Kepa, who played in all these matches, but he is their second-string goalkeeper, and it was a howler. It was an absolute howler. He dropped the ball, and Nick O'Reilly was right there to head in. The second goal was actually a carbon copy of that. Interestingly, Man City also did the same thing with their goalkeeper. They played their second-string goalkeeper, who was James Trafford, who played all their matches, and he made an amazing triple save in the first half. And had, Arsenal scored from that, maybe it would have been different. Maybe if Kepa had not made a mistake, things would have been different because Arsenal, did seem to sort of dip after that point. But I suppose the question that's being asked this morning is, what does this mean for Arsenal? Does it mean that suddenly they doubt themselves going for the Premier League title or the other cups that they're in? Is there
does it mean we choke in every competition?
Yeah, pretty much is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
It's kind of sad because they've barely mentioned the quadruple. Arsenal fans, have they?
Never in these 4 walls.
Well, I mean, facts are facts. They were on for the quadruple, which, no one's ever done.
Yeah, but I guess every team
with
is
good
at the start
reason.
of the season.
But there's a gap now. There's the international break. And maybe that's a good thing, that you can put some distance between this and, restart when you go on with the rest of the season. I mean, that's exactly what Spurs are going to have to do, because I suppose if there was any consolation for Arsenal fans, it was also what a bad day Spurs fans had yesterday. It was a real 6-pointer against Nottingham Forest. They really needed to get something or at least win that match, and they were thrashed 3-0 by Forest. at Tottenham in a ground which is gorgeous, but Spurs just can't seem to win there. We can have a look at those goals now. 3-0. I mean, it was absolutely comprehensive. Forest were brilliant. Spurs were inept. Questions being asked about their manager, Igor Tudor. Will he be jettisoned now before the next set of matches? Because they could go down. They are just above the drop zone. Forest have leapfrogged them. Honestly, if, you know, the other results had gone against them, they would be in the drop zone this morning. If West Ham hadn't lost to Villa, they would have swapped places.
Jackie, obviously they're not in the drop zone yet, so I'm careful to say that. But no, if they do go down, would you think this would be the biggest club to be relegated at that point? You know,
Yeah.
We've had Villa, we've had Newcastle, but
well,
Spurs are
yeah,
a huge
because
club.
the big six, nobody has been relegated apart from Man City. But that was before Man City had money. It was before that life-changing money that came in from their owners. So they have been relegated, but nobody else.
It'd be the biggest stadium in the Championship.
We're talking Premier League. It would be the most.
Spent a fortune on this amazing
And
stadium.
it would cost them about 250 million, at least. There was a great day yesterday for Britain's athletes. 3 in particular all of them took gold within the space of 30 minutes, starting with Georgia Hunter-Bell, who took gold in the 1,500 metres for her first global title. And that was 2 years after quitting her office job in tech sales. Running a world-leading time.
Yeah, she just did some really good park runs. She was like, you know what, I think I might start doing this more. Amazing.
Not bad at this.
Molly Cowdery also won the pole vault. Amazing, because she had a disaster at the Olympics and didn't even make the final, so she is now world indoor champion. She's had injuries too. And Keely Hodgkinson was just in a league of her own in the 800 metres. She broke the world record a couple of weeks ago, and nobody could get near her. I mean, she's so fast. You can't even see the rest coming behind.
It's so nice to have a bit of positivity.
I agree.
No, honestly, to end on.
It was.
In so many ways. But we will be back at the top of the next hour with the latest on the Iran war.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. We're trying to see as much as we can.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophy and Wilf, good morning from both of us. Let's get to it.
The Prime Minister condemns an anti-Semitic arson attack on Jewish volunteer ambulances in North London.
New York's LaGuardia airport is closed after a plane crashes into a ground vehicle on the runway, killing the pilot and the co-pilot.
Keir Starmer will be ready to chair an emergency Cobra meeting on the effect of the Iran war and its impact here on UK households. It follows a phone call he had with President Trump last night.
Jack is going to be here with the sport, including Man City's triumph in the Carabao Cup final. Who was it there against?
I've got one more hour of having to do this, and I'm going to put my
They beat Arsenal 2-0.
Head in the sand for the rest of the day. We'll also bring you amazing moment when Sky News tracked down and confronted the fraudster who conned an old lady out of her life savings before fleeing prison in Tenerife.
Good morning. We start with some breaking news. An anti-Semitic arson attack on a Jewish volunteer ambulance service in North London.
4 ambulances outside a synagogue in Golders Green were set on fire last night in an attack the Prime Minister has labelled deeply shocking.
Well, the London Fire Brigade say the vehicles were destroyed after the cylinders inside the ambulances exploded, and then that caused windows to break in a nearby block of flats.
The good news is that no injuries have been reported. Oliver is on the scene for us this morning. What is the very latest, Oliver? Good morning.
Good morning, Wilf. The very latest is that the police are investigating this anti-Semitic hate incident, which has seen 4 of the Hatzola community ambulance service vehicles. 3 of them completely destroyed. 1 of them has sustained quite a lot of damage. Sky News has been invited inside the apartment block right next to where this series of fires and explosions has taken place. And we've seen firsthand the damage that has been caused to people's windows that were blown in when those gas canisters on board these ambulances exploded. On some cases, these were right next to children's bedrooms. 4 young children sharing a room, sharing bunk beds, quickly evacuated out of that room just before those explosions happened, with the parents saying they feel incredibly lucky that they managed to get their children out just in time. And there's a thick smell of acrid smoke inside that block. The Hatzola ambulance service is run by volunteers. It caters not only to the Jewish community, but to the community right around Golders Green, but predominantly to the Jewish community. It is sensitive of the cultural sensitivities of the religion, especially amongst the Orthodox population that you can find around Golders Green. And so it is really a well-regarded institution in this area. It is something that a lot of the people we've been speaking to say they feel personally targeted because of this attack. We were speaking earlier on to 2 of those people who heard and saw those explosions as they were happening.
When I got there, then there was already a large fire engine support team and the police. They'd already blocked off some of the road, but we could still see it from a distance. 2 ambulances were already on fire, and I could see from the distance there was a 3rd that hadn't caught fire yet. But when I was there, that one blew up. These ambulances are actually parked in a synagogue's car park. And just to see that clip that is now doing its rounds on social media of a few hooded individuals lighting life-saving ambulances is something that just is shaking us all to the core.
So we were obviously sleeping at that time, and we just heard explosions, and our windows kind of moved and we heard the burst. So we looked out the window and we saw the ambulances on fire.
There has been condemnation from right across the political spectrum against this anti-Semitic hate crime incident, and yet for a lot of the people that live in this community around say they're not surprised that this has happened. They say that as Jewish people living in the United Kingdom, it's unfortunately something that they have grown accustomed to, because in the aftermath of the October 7th terrorist attacks, in the aftermath of the Heaton Park attacks, the general feeling and this rise in anti-Semitic hatred that has been seen and witnessed in the United Kingdom, they say it's something that they unfortunately have gotten used to and something that they sadly have to prepare for. So once again, Jewish people in Britain saying that they feel nervous and concerned and they feel like they're being personally attacked.
Oliver, thank you very much indeed. Oliver reporting there from North London. Well, Oliver was just talking about the political condemnation. That includes, of course, the Prime Minister. This is what Keir Starmer posted on social media. This is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. My thoughts are with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to this horrific news. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with any information must come forward to speak to the police.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Minister for Housing and Planning, Matthew Pennycook, who echoed similar sentiments.
This is a deeply shocking incident, as you know, on volunteer Hatzola ambulances that serve the Jewish community. I think our thoughts in the first instance, obviously, are with the volunteers who man that service, with the wider community who will be feeling understandably concerned. The Met are investigating the incident as an anti-Jewish hate crime. If that is confirmed, I just want to be really clear, that would be an affront to the Jewish community in this country, but not only an affront to the Jewish community, an attack on us all, because there can be absolutely no place for anti-Semitism, for anti-Jewish hatred in this country. And sadly, I think it reinforces the need, as our department is doing, to invest in things like the Community Security Trust, which provides security to Jewish schools, synagogues and others. But it's deeply concerning.
We'll have more on that later on in the programme. But another breaking story overnight. There's been a plane crash at New York's LaGuardia airport, which has killed 2 people.
It's the Air Canada plane, and it was landing when it collided with a ground vehicle just before midnight. Both the pilot and the co-pilot were killed. Passengers reportedly injured as well, and the airport has been closed.
Here are some of the latest pictures. The Air Canada plane was landing when it collided with a ground vehicle just before midnight. Both the pilot and co-pilot, as we mentioned, were killed in the collision. Let's listen to the authorities holding a press conference just moments ago.
At approximately 11:40 last night, Air Canada Flight 8646, operated by Jazz, collided with the Port Authority aircraft rescue and firefighter vehicle on runway 4. The plane carried 72 passengers and 4 crew. The ARFF vehicle carried 2 officers. In accordance with our emergency plan, our mutual aid partners, FDNY and NYPD, immediately responded. Initial numbers indicate that 41 passengers and crew were transported to the hospital, as well as the ARF officers.
We'll keep updating you, of course, on that story. But just to bring you the latest now on the war in Iran, because there's been a few key developments this morning. Firstly, the Prime Minister is going to be holding an emergency meeting of the Cobra Committee this afternoon, looking at how the war is impacting the British economy after speaking to President Trump on the phone last night. It was 20 minutes, so quite a long call. Also, over the weekend, President Trump laid down an ultimatum for Iran. Open the Straits of Hormuz this evening, he said, or else the US would obliterate Iran's power plants. Let's get out to Sally. She's live in Dubai. I
think we've adapted to a new normal here in the UAE, as have other Gulf countries, of these daily interceptions of missiles and drones. The air defences certainly here have been doing a great job. And I think residents have got used to this. They feel largely safe. But certainly I would say that in the last 24 hours, there have been more residents expressing a slight unease to me, given the escalatory language and threats that we're now hearing from both sides, and just the trajectory in which this war is moving. And certainly, you know, this morning we've had shelter-in-place orders already here just before 7 o'clock in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. A missile was intercepted over an industrial area in Abu Dhabi heading towards the US military base Al Dhafra, and we understand that an Indian resident was injured by falling shrapnel. Bahrain, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have all reported similar incoming fire overnight. But certainly it is this deadline that Donald Trump set, giving Iran 48 hours to essentially reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or to see their oil plants targeted, starting with the largest first, as he put it. And certainly this is causing a lot of concern because Iran has responded saying, well, if you do that, we are going to retaliate and we will be targeting energy infrastructure belonging to the US and Israel, as well as potentially IT infrastructure and desalination plants, which are crucial to this region for drinking water. And this does represent a potential dangerous turning point in this war if these threats are kept to. And certainly a lot of people are asking, well, why has Donald Trump set himself this very firm deadline of 48 hours, which is tomorrow morning, in the early hours of the morning, local time here? And why has he detailed such specific consequences? Because it does make it much harder for him to step back. And let's not forget, he's also got thousands of Marines and sailors making their way to this region from the Sea of Japan, and we don't yet know what they're going to be used for. We don't even know if Donald Trump knows yet what they're going to be used for. But certainly the language and the threats are causing a lot of concern here because people have got used to this new normal in the last 3 weeks or so. And I think there is a concern that if these threats are followed through, we could be looking at a dangerous new phase of this war.
Sally there. And look, here in the UK, politicians are worried. They're convening Cobra, they're calling in the governor of the Bank of England, and I guess the reason is they're looking at the same chance as you, Wolf.
Yeah, so borrowing costs is really the focus today. But let's just remind ourselves of what oil prices have done since the start of the war. So oil prices this morning, somewhat surprisingly, you might say, only up another percent, $113.50 for Brent crude, up a tad this morning, but picked up again in the middle of last week quite significantly after, of course, a very sharp rise since the start of this war and indeed since the start of the year. That's the snapshot of oil prices. And until really last week, we were wondering a little bit as to why it hadn't spilled out into lots of other financial market assets as well. But that really ended, certainly when it came to UK borrowing costs at the end of last week. Here is the UK 10-year borrowing cost. So it had, of course, risen since the start of the war. But last week, on Thursday, we had a Bank of England decision. They held rates unanimously, and yet rates continued to surge late last week, Thursday and Friday. And therefore, there was a question, despite, of course, ongoing volatility, as Sally just told us over the weekend, whether we'd have a calmer day today in UK borrowing costs because they surged so aggressively late last week. That's not the case. So this morning, we're up again on the UK 10-year borrowing costs. We're at 5.06%. It begins with a 5. It hasn't done that since 2008. 18-year high for the UK's 10-year borrowing costs. I also just want to show you the 1-year borrowing costs because this gives us a better indication of what the market is expecting the Bank of England to do. A reminder, the Bank of England base rate is currently 3.75%. So we're talking about this level. So at the start of this war, the market actually expected a cut. The 1-year borrowing cost was down at about 3.5%. I mean, this is really a very, very sharp increase. And a lot of it came, by the way, last week itself, not just from the start of the war. This is up again this morning. We're at 4.6%, above 4.6% on the 1-year borrowing cost. And just pause for a second to see what that is implying. The market is not just expecting the Bank of England to no longer cut, it's expecting it to hike 4 times. The market now expects the Bank of England to hike its interest rates 4 times before the end of the year, from 3.75% to 4.75%. An astonishing change for everyone, for the Bank of England, for the Chancellor as she prepares government spending, and for people at home, because, of course, that'll have knock-on effects for mortgages. It's also affecting stock markets. Let's just have a quick look at what European markets are doing this morning. Selling across the board, maybe you'd say it should be selling more. 1.5%, 2%. If we're looking at France there, FTSE 100 down 1.75%. So shares selling off as well today, Sophie. But the real focus, borrowing costs, which became the case Thursday, Friday, and sadly is continuing today.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, the borrowing cost charts that you're showing, we've obviously got Andrew Bailey meeting with members of the Cabinet and Keir Starmer later today. I mean, how significant do you think it is that they've called him in?
Very significant, and it's what you'd expect in a moment like this. And by the way, if the Bank of England governor wanted to, he could calm those surges in borrowing costs quite easily. The problem is, what's the sort of secondary effect of that? So his priority is to make sure the bond market is functioning. And it is functioning at higher borrowing costs than just a week ago, but you don't want it to be disorderly. And so that'll be probably what they're speaking to him about today. He could step in just by buying some of these bonds, and suddenly they'd be calm, the borrowing costs would come down. That's what we did after the financial crisis in 2008. It's what we did after COVID. The problem is back then we didn't have inflation. So the offset of the Bank of England getting more involved in what's going on is that it's going to be inflationary. It's essentially injecting money into the system. So we are really in a bind this time. The priority will be short-term financial stability. So we might well see something like that coming forward. We don't know. What's also really interesting is that the market is expecting quite so many rate hikes. Because, why? Oil prices rising is inflationary. Might the Bank of England therefore have to hike rates to temper inflation? The problem you have this time, this cause of inflation is also potentially recessionary. Of course, it's not because people are expecting a wage hike that we're getting inflation, it's because their costs are rising. So you're in this double whammy situation where the kind of solution to the inflation worsens the economic environment, and that's where you don't want things to spiral.
And you've got in a situation, of course, where cost of living pressure is acute. I mean, look, all of us know we've lived through it, right? And the government has made it the central political mission of 2026, and it has been thrown, I guess, dramatically off course by what's happened internationally.
Now, moving on, Iranian nationals living here in the UK are divided over whether the war is the best thing for their country. Some are desperate for regime change and believe military action is the only way to achieve that. Others fear the fighting will only strengthen Iran. Ashish Joshi has been finding out why people are so conflicted on the topic.
I want a secular, democratic government. I'm not monarchist, but I respect Reza Pahlavi. All these opposition, they did nothing. I was a child, but they did nothing. The opposition, none of them did anything. But Reza Pahlavi, the only thing, the thing I like about him is, first of all, he was brought up in Western country. So he knows freedom, what freedom means.
Is it okay for Iranian lives to be lost for what you want to achieve?
Unfortunately, this is what we have to. 47 years we have lost lives. God knows, how many people, but I think that if Israel and America, and I don't think that they are angels, no. We have problem with them as well. But if we didn't have Islamic Republic regime, they wouldn't come to Iran.
I've grown up going to Iran every summer, as much as we can afford. We speak Farsi in my home. I spoke Farsi before I spoke English. And I went to Iranian school every Saturday where I learned to read and write in Farsi. And I have always been extremely close with my family in Iran, extremely close. I personally cannot say that I am happy with bombs being dropped on my country where civilians are dying, and it's not in their interest, it's in the interest of US and Israel. However, what I do know is that this is a breaking point. We've never seen this amount of intervention and attack on the military, on the intelligence of the dictatorship that Iran has. Now we need to look at what do we do now? Whose voices do we listen to now? We listen to Iranians, all of them, not just monarchists. We also listen to Kurds. We also listen to Azaris, all the ethnic groups, all the religions. What did they want? Because we've never been asked this.
Well, Ashish is here with us to reflect on this piece, and you can watch the full piece online as well. Was it roughly split, the kind of gap you saw there?
No, it's not split at all. And the problem is, Wilf, nobody knows exactly what the divide is. We know that there are deep divisions within the Iranian community, but there's no data, no polling, which will give us an exact representation. So we only have anecdotal and observational evidence. And what that might do is skew the amount of support the Pahlavists have. These are the people, the monarchists who want to see a return of the monarchy. Reza Pahlavi, who lives in exile in the United States, has asked Donald Trump if he can return to Iran as an intermediary, but that would mean, of course, he can only go if the regime falls and there is an end to the theocracy. What I found by making this film and speaking to Iranians is the deep divisions that exist, but even the people who want to see regime change do not want Western intervention. They want regime change, but not at the cost of Israeli and American bombs killing innocent civilians. So that tells us it's a really difficult situation for Iranian nationals to be in. One of the voices you heard there tends to reflect the first wave of Iranian immigrants who arrived in this country after the fall of the Shah, when the Islamic Revolution took place in 1979. They are secularists, they are liberal, they're left-wing, they're intellectuals, they're academics, and they tend to be an older, so there is a generational divide, so they tend to be the older supporters of regime change. But the younger Iranians want to see regime change, but do not want necessarily for these bombs to be falling on the country. But then that begs the question, if they want to see regime change, how will that regime change come about? And you heard one voice there saying, well, now we're there, can we possibly expect regime change, and should we support it? So they are questioning themselves. Very difficult time for Iranians.
So interesting. Ashish, thanks very much for the report there. Well, Keir Starmer has been speaking this morning ahead, of course, of the Cobra meeting that he's convening for this afternoon. He's been talking at a school in South East London. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
There is the opportunity at the highest level to bring people together on matters of real significant national importance. Obviously, Cobras are usually used for sort of military considerations, consular considerations, but I think with the Iran war, most people are very concerned now, not only what they're seeing on their screens in relation to the conflict itself, but also that question of how's it going to affect me and my family. And so today we're looking at the economic impact, and I am asking for every lever that's available to the government to deal with the cost of living to be discussed at Cobra. Hence, we've got the Bank of England and others there. But I want to make sure that when it comes to the cost of living, we're doing everything we possibly can at a very difficult period like this.
Okay. Elsewhere today, 4 ambulances belonging to the Jewish emergency service have been attacked or set on fire in an attack on London Synagogue. Do you have any comment on this appalling attack? And have police found or caught the perpetrators?
Well, this is a horrific anti-Semitic attack. And, of course, my thoughts, I think all of our thoughts, will be with those in the vicinity, the residents who are understandably very concerned, a Jewish community across the country deeply concerned. I've already been in touch with community leaders this morning and will continue to do so during the day. But anti-Semitism has no place in our society, and it's really important that we all stand together at a moment like this.
And just finally, on the war in Iran, how safe are we from Iranian missiles if 2 were fired at the Chagos Islands, as we now know? How close did one get? Why keep this a secret, as some say? And how was your call last night with Donald Trump?
Well, no missiles hit the Chagos Islands, as you know. There were 2 heading in that direction. And it's really important that we call out these reckless acts by Iran against British interests, British lives, against our allies in the Gulf region. And that is why we're standing with our allies. That's why my #1 concern is protecting British interests and British lives. That's why we've got a defensive action going on in the region, and we will continue to do so. But these are reckless acts, and we need to do everything we can, and we will do everything we can, to protect our interests and our lives.
And are we in range here?
I'm sorry?
Are we in range here for missiles?
Well, look, we carry out assessments all the time in order to keep us safe, and there's no assessment that we're being targeted in that way at all. But of course, it's my job to ensure that British interests, British lives are always uppermost in my mind. What we need here is de-escalation. We need, and that's why we had a statement from a number of countries last week about what we need to do about the Straits of Hormuz, which obviously needs careful coordination and a viable plan. But it's very important we defend our interests, we defend British lives, but without getting dragged into the war. And that's the clear divide I've put in place. Yes, defend our interests, defend British lives. No, not get dragged into the war.
Sir Keir Starmer, thank you.
Thank you.
Keir Starmer speaking to us there, speaking to journalists there at that visit in the school in South East London ahead of that all-important Cobra meeting. Interesting, I thought he said, today we're looking at the economic impact. He's asking for every lever that's available to the government to deal with the cost of living to be discussed at Cobra, and pointing to the fact that the governor at the Bank of England is there too. Well, let's get a bit more on this, shall we? We can talk to the Conservatives' Robbie Moore now, the Shadow Farming Minister. Good to see you here. So Keir Starmer saying that he wants every lever to be ready. And if you're looking at it through the lens of the Bank of England, then that's what, printing money, that's buying bonds. I guess these things could be inflationary. Is that the kind of thing that we need to be looking at?
Well, I do think it's right that every lever, every ability for the state to have some sort of influence is right that it's considered. But there are levers that the Prime Minister has available to him right now to do with positively impacting the cost of living, because we already know that the government are going to be rolling out a fuel duty increase, which will impact many of our rural communities, those families across the country. And he could make the decision not to implement that. We will have to wait and see. It's something that we've been calling on.
They've scrapped the first one and they're waiting and seeing on the next one. I mean, that feels fair, doesn't it? Because we still don't really know how long this is going to go on for.
Well, I think based on what we're seeing and how things are playing out within Iran, and we know that the inflationary challenges that are already happening, it is a reasonable expectation that fuel prices are going to increase, as well as things like fertiliser that's impacting an inflationary challenge on food prices that will come down further down the line. So I think there are measures that the government could take now without looking at other things beyond that have been mooted, like rationing and things like that. So
you're talking about the impact on rural communities. We had an email in from Joanne, who lives on a farm. She's talking about red diesel prices in particular, saying that it's doubled in price where they are. They're completely shocked by it. And she's saying that this is going to impact everybody because cost of production will pass up the chain to supermarket prices. I mean, how worried are you about that?
Hugely worried. I mean, she is absolutely right. I was with our farming community this weekend, and just to put this in context, the price of red diesel has risen from about 67 pence a litre just last month to about now 135 pence a litre.
So more than doubled?
More than doubled, actually, over a relatively short period of time, within weeks. Now, this impacts all of our farmers, because all of those within the farming community will be using red diesel to carry out the work that they'll be doing on the land. That is in addition to the dramatic increase in fertiliser prices that will continue to rise if the Strait of Hormuz is not sorted out. And that's on top of all of the other challenges our farming community are facing through decisions that this government has made on things like de-linked payments dramatically reducing the sustainable farming incentive, negatively impacting our farming community. So again, this is something that the government could have influence on if they chose to do so.
I mean, you obviously, and I get it, you're in the opposition, keen to kind of paint this through the lens of what the government's doing, but an awful lot of this is due to the actions of the US and Israel, right? Because of in Iran. Donald Trump giving the Iranians a deadline of just before midnight tonight to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, he says the US will obliterate Iran's energy system. Would that be a good idea, to obliterate Iran's energy system?
Well, look, I know a deadline has been set by President Trump for this evening for the Strait of Hormuz to be opened. We'll have to wait and see. As a member of the opposition, I'm not party to the, as you'd expect, the inner conversations that are taking place within government. But it is absolutely alarming that all of this leads to inflationary challenges with our households across the country and those that are producing food, as we've indicated.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're not going to know the ins and outs, but as you say, you're here to talk about inflationary pressure. Donald Trump has threatened to obliterate Iran's energy system. That's going to have an inflationary impact. Would it be a good idea?
Absolutely. It will have an inflationary impact, and therefore it's deeply concerning.
What do you think the government needs to do more to, I guess, stand up to Donald Trump, unlike what the Conservatives have been saying?
Well, look, I think it's absolutely right that all allies are actually working closely together. We have an Iranian direction that is hitting many of our British values and military bases. We've seen Cyprus already being targeted, and now we've seen over the weekend Diego Garcia being targeted as well. These are British military bases, and therefore it is right that as a country we're working closely with our allies, of which the US is most definitely one of them.
Can I also just finally ask you about the attack that we've seen on these 4 Jewish volunteer ambulances in North London? Is London a safe place for Jewish people?
Well, look, absolutely what happened over this evening is horrendous attack on our Jewish community. Once again, completely condemn those attacks, and it's created a huge amount of our Jewish community now being unsure and feeling unsafe on our streets. And it's not just the capital. We've seen this across the country with the attacks that took place in Manchester. And this is not only an attack on the Jewish community, but British values as well, actually. So it's right that the Prime Minister has called this and come out and said that it's an anti-Semitic attack, and and we're seeing now, even on social media, the rollout of those attacks taking place through verbal means on social media against our Jewish community. So the government have got to provide a huge amount of reassurance to our Jewish community, working with local authorities, working with the police, the Met Police, making sure that those perpetrators are brought to account, but providing ultimately that reassurance that no matter who you are, you should feel safe on the streets. And it's unfortunate and that our Jewish community are feeling a huge amount of strain based on what's happened last night.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme today. Coming up, of course, we are going to be talking about the cost of living pressures here in the UK. We're also going to be talking about the geopolitical situation as it does feel, doesn't it, like things are escalating, continuing to escalate between the US and Iran. We'll be talking to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, about his time reporting on the war from inside Iran.
Welcome back. Now, you will have seen some of the incredible reporting from inside Iran from our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, over the past week.
So Dom's team was only the second international news team allowed into Iran since the beginning of the war, and the stories and the pictures that he brought us from inside were really quite striking.
He joins us now from outside Iran, to state the obvious. But Dom, great to have you with us. Really was completely unique, so much of the coverage last week. Just first, a big picture question. What was it like operating in Iran?
Hi, Wilf. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Wilf. Great to be on the show, and good to be out of Iran. It was a pretty intense week. It was hard to get a visa. Sky really believes in eyewitness journalism, so we have pushed very hard to get a visa, and we were able then, as you say, to be the second international news team allowed into the country. There are teams there based there, but in terms of teams allowed in, we were only the second, and it was a tricky journey. You can't fly in. Obviously, the airspace is closed, so we had to drive in. It was a 48-hour journey from Heathrow to Tehran. What we found, though, was a city that was tense, subdued, and obviously under regular bombardment. And I think for the people living there, the main point to say, it is absolutely terrifying. They are not used to this. And as journalists, it was difficult operating there, finding out stuff in terms of the internet being closed, operating safely, because normally in a war zone, you know where the front line is. And in a sense, the entire city is the front line there. And Israel and America are dropping enormous bombs on what are residential areas. Now, they say they're precisely targeted. They are hitting their targets, but they're massive bombs that you could feel. At one point, we were literally shaken in our beds in the hotel by a massive bomb that we think killed Ali Larijani, one of the top security officials. And so for Iranians living under that, it is terrifying, and some of them being affected very directly and tragically.
And Dominic, it's so important, as you say, for eyewitness journalism, for journalists getting into countries. And it does feel with the people in Iran as well, we're constantly almost kind of surmising what they think or trying to predict what they think. What's your sense after talking to people in Iran about how the people of Iran are feeling?
Well, there is this tension, Sophie, and obviously that goes back to before the war, because you had this massive unrest. Tens of thousands of people came out on the streets in January and February, hating their government, expressing their frustration with the government and the economic situation, which isn't just a government mismanagement issue. It's because they are heavily sanctioned by the West over the nuclear issue. And they obviously were made more angry by the fact that many of them were shot dead by their security forces. So that adds to this sort of tension, and some were able to speak to us. A lot of people won't speak on camera. Some spoke to us off camera and said that they were fed up with their extreme government and they hope that after the war things change. Having said that, there is a hardcore of hundreds of thousands of people still who support the government, and we saw them at a massive funeral for Ali Larijani towards the end of the week. I think in the middle, you've got Iranians who, I think a lot of them feel now that the war is being directed at them. You know, if you live under the threat of bombardment that is threatening your family and your homes and your neighbours, it's hard not to take that personally. So I think a lot of them see these attacks now aimed not so much at the government, but at them, at their country. One Iranian said to us, when the Israelis attacked the major gas field in southern Iran that has led to this massive escalation and this sort of global energy crisis, he said, why are they attacking gas fields? That's ours. That's not the government's. That's not the regime's. That belongs to us. And I think that gives a sense, really, of how Iranians sort of see this war being aimed not just at the government. And in some senses, I think that is probably galvanising some support for the government. And also, of course, in a time of war, it is easier to suppress unrest. So I think we got a sense. We were there for a week, only in one city, able to talk to a number of people, but obviously not able to get a comprehensive picture of the entire country. But there is a sense, I think, that this war is actually strengthening support for the government. And certainly we had a sense the government feels like it's confident, it's in control, it's been decapitated, one leader after another. But it's certainly still calling the shots there.
Well, that was where I was going to go to wrap things up, Dominic. Just the extent to which you think that the regime is still resolute and in control. And, you know, I guess one thing to make announcements on social media and on state media. Do you think they've got the power, the authority, the grip to continue doing what they claim they're going to do?
Yeah, I think that's the impression we've had, Wilf. And I think, you know, the sense we've got talking to the diplomats who are not being targeted, so we were able to go to the Foreign Ministry and interview them, is that they have been preparing for this war for a long time. They've seen it coming, and they saw it most recently coming with all the military sort of materiel being sort of parked in the region around them. So they have prepared for this. Lines of succession have been designated. So the supreme leader was killed and he was replaced fairly quickly by his son. And each official who's been killed has had a designated successor. And I think what we've seen in terms of how that translates in the military sense is when that gas field was attacked, the Iranians immediately struck the Ras Laffan Qatari gas facility and targets in Saudi Arabia. So that's kind of, it shows that even though it's decapitated, it's very badly battered, and it's lost a lot of its commanders and officials, it's still able to operate in a way that makes sense in a strategic sense. And I think it's gone underground, I mean, literally, it is not communicating electronically, according to the Israelis, but that leadership is still able to operate, and it's obviously digging in its heels. And I think the other point to make quickly is that, you know, Iranian culture is all about resistance. It's about resisting persecution. That's a sheer virtue, but also it's a kind of Persian virtue. And I think the government is expecting its people to resist, to make sacrifices. That may not be that popular, but certainly that's what it's expecting. And it's, I think, therefore, fairly confident it's going to be able to see this through for weeks. And it hopes it could then outlast the enemy, particularly America. I think Israel is in this for the long run. But obviously there's a political clock and all kind of economic clocks ticking for Donald Trump. And I think the Iranians hope that they can outlast him.
Dominic, great to have you with us. Great stuff over the course of the last week or so. Let's talk about now what might be going through the mind of President Trump and those closest to him, and bring in Matt Terrell, who is a Republican strategist and former advisor to Marco Rubio, of course, is the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. He joins us now from Washington. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Matt, big picture question for you first. Frame for us where public opinion is, and I guess in particular in the Republican base towards this conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be with you. And in the Republican base, there is no question that the base is behind President Trump. We saw recently in a CNN poll that 100% of MAGA is behind President Trump. And then just looking at the polling further beyond the base, what we've also seen in polling is that going into the war, President Trump was at about 41% in terms of his approval rating. As of now, he's still at 41% in terms of his approval rating. So the punchline there is that President Trump's approval rating really has not changed in terms of this conflict. This conflict has not changed its approval rating among Americans nationwide. But the truth is, what Americans care about right now is, of course, life. They care about the people of Iran and this conflict, but they also care about, obviously, the economic components of this. Gas prices is top of mind among Americans nationwide, and I think they were pleased to see Secretary Scott Bessent take the course that he took recently to relieve some of the regime changes, or excuse me, some of these sanctions are put on oil related to the regime in Iran. Also pleased to see what President Trump recently did in terms of lifting restrictions on a pipeline in California. So what the administration is doing right now is taking proactive approaches to ensure that gas prices come down here in the United States. That's a key component of this, of course, to watch as well.
I guess the key thing, Matt, for us to get across then now is we're talking here about huge increases in, for example, UK borrowing costs, and it you know, changing the likely path of rate hikes from the Bank of England in the year ahead. Do you get the feeling that there is similar pressure on President Trump to change course on this war? It doesn't sound like it, based on the polling, at least.
I don't think there's pressure to change course. I think the American people nationwide, many of them recognize that this was partially a national security crisis that the United States was facing. President Trump has been clear, both in the 2024 presidential campaign as well as back to 2016, about the threat that Iran presented in terms of its nuclear capabilities. So I think the American people, the majority of them, in my opinion at least, I think stand with him on that. And then on the economic front, you know, it's not just the gas prices that Americans are focused on, it's also fertilizer. What we've seen here in the United States is that farmers, many of them, the majority of them, bought their fertilizer months ago, so we're prepared for this. You know, the truth is, the economy has been doing quite well under President Trump. We've seen record highs in the stock market. I think right now, what the administration has been doing a positive job of messaging is that this is a temporary blimp. You've seen President Trump say that. You've seen Vice President Vance out there around the country talk about how this is a temporary blimp, if you will, and that the reality is that help is on the way in terms of ensuring gas prices come down, economic stability here. I think many Americans nationwide are willing to take some hits here economically for national security purposes, but also recognize that there is positive momentum in the economy over the past few months under President Trump. I think that gives President Trump a lot of credibility to talk about the strength in the economy that will be coming next on the heels of this conflict.
Temporary, of course, until it isn't. And the bond market moves of the last couple of trading days obviously start to potentially change that narrative a little bit. But Matt, next question I had, you know Marco Rubio very well. Do you get the feeling that he is as committed to this as President Trump was? And what do you say to people that suggest Prime Minister Netanyahu pushed President Trump into this action?
Yeah, first of all, I think Secretary Rubio is absolutely committed to this. I'll let the Secretary speak for himself, but I think everybody, including the Secretary, are behind President Trump. There's no question that President Trump has a unified support of his administration. And then beyond that, look, I think it's also important to recognize where the American people are at on this, and I think the majority of Americans nationwide recognize the importance of taking action here as it relates to Iran. But look, the reality is, I don't think the argument that anybody brought President Trump into this war holds weight. I mean, look, I think whether you like President Trump or not, people know that he makes his own decisions, and he is the president at the end of the day. And nobody can pull President Trump into doing anything. There's certainly people on his team who can advise him, and I think President Trump, particularly in his second term, really has an open ear to suggestions and advice. But the truth is, a great president ultimately makes decisive action at the end of the day. What we've seen under President Trump is he's taking decisive action clearly in terms of what's been conducted here on Iran. I think he's obviously got the support of his administration behind him, support of the country behind him. And then obviously world leaders. You're seeing right now the UN Secretary General call upon world leaders to step up here, if you will. You saw recently, over the past few hours, Japan willing to commit military support here to this conflict. So I think you're seeing on the global stage here that support as well for a coalition to really push forward here to make sure there's unified support on the global stage with this conflict as well.
Matt, thanks so much. Much appreciated, Matt Terrell there. I have to say, having been back and forth to the US in the last couple of weeks, it's interesting the extent to which I think in the US, a lot of people underprice how much opposition there is to all of this. And, the idea that European leaders are coming round to it as if they are kind of willingly is perhaps mispriced. But I also think people here underprice the extent to which President Trump isn't yet necessarily feeling the pressure. I do think the bond market perhaps is the key thing to look at, but that his opinion polls amongst his base at least remain pretty strong on this. It's not as divided opinion as we might expect from sitting over here.
Let's talk now, shall we, about the anti-Semitic arson attack overnight on the Jewish volunteer ambulance service in North London. Phil Rosenberg is the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and joins us now from the scene. Just to say thank you so much for being with us. It's awful what happened. We understand that you spoke to Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, this morning. Is that right? And what did he say to you?
He expressed his and the government's solidarity with our community after this attack, and he said we'll be talking later on about next steps.
And sorry, we're connected there for a moment. Tell us a little bit more your reaction overnight when you heard of this.
Another day, another terrorist attack against the Jewish community around the world. So this is a really important response to what we are... I'm sorry, there's someone shouting. We have got a serious situation around the world in terms of the challenge to Jewish communities in the face of terrorism and anti-Semitism. This is not just a threat to Jewish communities, but a threat to societies as a whole. We know the Jewish community is a canary in the coal mine for societies and the health of societies. So we need a full systems response to this challenge.
I don't know the situation of what's happening where you are, but if you are being heckled, firstly to say that this is completely outrageous, and if you prefer to end it at any time, you have a space welcome in the studio to get your voice across and to make your voice heard, just to make that very clear. If you're happy to continue, we'll follow your lead on this. Can I ask you about what you think about the government's response to this? We had a minister in the studio here who said that he believes that London is a safe place for British Jews. Do you agree with him?
Look, we have to push back against hatred of this kind here and around the world. We want to see a strong response from the government. We've seen a number of different measures, but I think what we need to see is an action that is firmer, further and faster. We have seen too many of the incidents. Since the Heaton Park attack, we produced a series of guidances which we wanted the government to take on. They said in a report just a couple of weeks ago that they would be adopting those. We need to see that moving quickly. And and I've seen some reports that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, or a part of it, has claimed responsibility for this, the government needs to follow on and prescribe the IRGC as it has repeatedly promised to do.
Do you expect that to happen? Is it something you've engaged with the government on for a while?
Well, we absolutely have, and Labour in opposition promised to do it, and they've said that they're going to bring forward legislation to make it possible. We thought maybe the tools already exist to be able to do that. If they don't, they should be bringing it forward immediately as a matter of priority. But it is now time for the government to take decisive action against the threats against our community and against our country.
Talk a little bit about the role of the ambulances, because this is part, I guess, of, you have ambulances, security, some infrastructure that has been put at risk because of what's been going on.
So these ambulances are about saving lives, and the Jewish value absolutely is about choosing life. And we see when the people who've done this act against ambulances, they're completely bankrupt in their ideology. It is a despicable thing. But what we will do is we will rebuild. We will replace those ambulances. We'll respond with pride, with determination and with strength, and we'll come back stronger.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Again, sorry for these interruptions you had to endure there. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, been lots on the agenda today, and we do want to finish up with the sport. Some of us more than others wanting to finish.
Well, if you're a Man City fan, you're really definitely looking forward to this part of the programme, I think. But
yeah, I've had an email from a Man City fan, by the way, who's
saying what?
Very much enjoying the. Okay.
Or a Forest fan, or a Sunderland fan, for that matter. Or a fan of British athletics.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Man City first of all, because the way how much it meant to Pep Guardiola yesterday was actually really, it was quite sweet. He was very, I don't know, emotional, I think, at the end. The fact that he's won this now 5 times. And it still means so much, I think tells you quite a lot about him. For Arsenal, the questions are being asked. Well, there's lots of questions. One of them are, is this going to cause a bit of a rift in their belief that they can go on and win the other 3 competitions, including the Premier League, that they are still gunning for? Or will it sow doubt in their minds that they cannot get over the finish line? I mean, I'm sure you've got something to say about that. And also, why did Arteta, knowing that he really wanted to win something, not play his best team? Why did you not play David Raya in goal? Just because you're being fair or sentimental about the second-string keeper who played all of the other matches in this competition.
We wouldn't get that from winners like Man City, would you, Wilf?
Well, no, they did put in their second-choice keeper, and he stepped up to the spot. That's the problem.
And he made a great triple save, which could have changed everything in the first half. But, it's those moments in matches which are so tight like this that really make a difference. Let's have a look at the goals, because Nico O'Reilly... our director, I've just remembered, is a Man City fan, which is very worrying. Nick O'Reilly, what a weekend he has had, because he was called up to the England side. He celebrated his 21st birthday at the weekend, and then he made the most of that mistake by Kepa to get the first goal, which really sort of deflated Arsenal, I think. And then the second goal was almost a carbon copy of the first one from the cross, and he gets his head on the end of it. And, he's part of that new generation of Man City players, young players, a regenerated side that actually looked pretty good and made Arsenal look really ordinary. 80% possession in the second half for Man City. I mean, they just came out, took that game by the scruff of the neck and really owned it.
To Jackie's point, the question is, how do Arsenal respond? And Sophie, to your point, the most worrying thing is that Arteta was defending his choice of goalkeeper afterwards. And it doesn't scream like we get the message. We choked and we shouldn't have done.
I know, but you know what? If he'd made that trip, if he'd made a great save, if he had not made a mistake, we wouldn't even be talking about it. We would say, OK, fair's fair. Yeah, but
my favourite bit of the match was when, I can't remember the Man City player, but started just doing keepy-uppies.
Yeah, that's rude.
Massive trolling.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was just rude. He should not have done that. Was that Turkey? I can't remember.
It was Turkey.
Yes, it was Turkey. Right, OK. Let's also look at what happened to Spurs yesterday, because they really imploded against Nottingham Forest. They were at home. They really needed a win. They didn't get it. And they were, 3 goals down by the end of that match. And they've swapped places. Let's have a look at the goals. Swapped places with Forest at the bottom of the table. So they're just above the drop zone, point above the drop zone, and kind of saved by the fact that West Ham, who are in the drop zone, also lost to Villa yesterday. I mean, they're in a lot of trouble, and Igor Tudor, who's had a family bereavement, may well have been called in for meetings today had that not happened, which is obviously awful. But, what's going to happen? Do they get rid of him and get in another manager before the end of the season to save their season? It's a really difficult situation. It's a really unbelievable situation. Tyne Weir Derby, we've not really had much time to talk about.
We should talk a bit about it.
But that was really fantastic yesterday.
Yeah.
Sunderland grabbing in the nick of time the winning goal. And I just think Eddie Howe's got to rebuild this team now. Very deflating. They didn't win the last one either at the Stadium of Light. And sadly, that game was stopped because of racism towards Hatzola. But a great performance by Sunderland in the end. And we can talk about the triple.
Yeah, something we're all celebrating.
But not the Arsenal potential triple. At the World Indoor Athletics Championships, the Golden Girls, within the space of half an hour, there were 3 gold medals for Team GB. I'm going to show you the action now, starting with Georgia Hunter-Bell, taking gold in the 1,500 metres for her first global title. It was a world-leading time of 3.5853. Molly Cowdery won gold in the pole vault. It was a height of 4 metres 85. And she's come back from injury, which kind of ruined her World Championships, the outdoor one, and also had a disaster at the Olympics. So she was thrilled. And the new indoor 800-metre world record holder, Keely Hodgkinson, winning her first indoor world title. Absolutely dominant. Smashed the rest of the field, over a second ahead, in a championship record time of 55.30.
I saw on Georgia Hunter-Bell, who was the daughter of Andy Bell, who's a wonderful political editor. And she has an incredible story because she was a young athlete, gave it up, got a job, and then started doing really well in park runs and thought, actually, you know what, I fancy another go at this, and came back.
I missed it. And that was her message at the end was, you know, it's never too late to try and follow your dream or follow something that you love. And, you know, now she's a professional athlete and doing so well. But what was very funny about Keely yesterday, she raced off the track and then ran a leg of the 4x400 metres and ran faster than anybody else in that race on that one lap.
It's amazing. Incredible.
Amazing stuff. Congrats to all of them. Alas, congrats to Manchester City also.
Congrats.
Sky News Today, up next.